Are we waiting for one more?
Tracy's online.
Great. So let's bring the Historic Preservation Committee meeting for Tuesday, October 15th to order at 5:31. And Madison, we do a roll call.
Actually, y'all will do roll call.
Okay.
Say in the chair.
Kelly Toon here.
Lynn here.
Robert here.
Ken here.
Tracy here.
Hello,
Okay.
Tracy.
2 people on Zoom and everyone else present. And let's see. Pledge allegiance, correct.
Pledge allegiance to
Jesus to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all.
Okay. Are there any changes to the agenda?
There's not.
And all board
Nope.
members, nothing. So
I make a motion to approve the agenda of Planning and Zoning, Historical Preservation Committee, October 15th, 2024.
I'll second it.
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And then the approval of the minutes from September 17th. Both Ken and I were not present, so it's up to the 3 of you to.
I have.
Make a motion to approve the minutes from September.
I second the motion.
And all in favor, other than Ken and I, who are accused?
Aye.
Aye.
Just so for future reference, y'all really can't comment on the minutes, but you can vote on the minutes.
Okay. Aye.
Just because you're
Aye.
not there.
All right, then we'll vote. Aye. Okay, any conflicts of interest to be declared for any item on the agenda tonight?
No.
I think Kelly Toon and I are involved in one agenda item, the Myers Barn.
Correct.
So when that comes up, I think I guess me metaphysically or whatever, we'll move to the audience. Is that correct, Madison?
Y'all will recuse yourselves, yes.
Okay.
Will that mean that they can't comment on it other than to provide information according to their application?
They are the applicant. So they would essentially, and I understand, Sam, that this is probably an interesting one for you to come in on. But they would recuse themselves. Kelly would get up from the dais, move to the audience, and depending on who's giving the presentation, whether that's Ken, Woody, or Kelly, they would give the presentation, and then y'all would ask questions of them.
Okay, but they wouldn't be voting or anything?
They would not be voting no.
Okay, I don't see any citizens for public comment. Is there anyone online?
No one online.
So we'll close public comments. Any special presentations? I guess that's our commissioner training. So,
Yes.
Madison, would you like to introduce our guest?
Absolutely. So this is Sam Light with CIRSA. CIRSA is the insurance for the town and for the boards that serve the town. And so every year or so, or whenever the new members get appointed, we like to have Sam come in and do training for our boards, specifically Planning Commission and HPC. Our town attorney typically handles the one for council, just so that everybody kind of understands what their role is, what the difference between legislative and quasi-judicial is, and if they have any questions about what they're supposed to be doing, Sam is a very helpful resource.
Thank you, Madison. Appreciate that. Good to see you all. Thanks for having me out this evening. So as was mentioned, I'm Sam Light, and I'm the Deputy Executive Director and General Counsel for CIRSA. CIRSA is an acronym which stands for the Colorado Intergovernmental Risk Sharing Agency, which is kind of a mouthful, right? Which is why we call it CIRSA. So we're your property provider, your insurance provider for property and casualty insurance. So we do the things like provide insurance for your buildings, your vehicles. Probably of more interest to you, we provide the liability coverage for everything from a slip and fall out in front of town hall to public officials liability coverage. I hope it wasn't your first question when you signed up for the HPC, right? But it's like, so I have some insurance protection here if somebody gets their back up about what we're doing, right? And you do, you have public officials liability coverage through, CIRSA, knock on wood, it's very, very infrequent that we have full-blown litigation that involves appointed officials within our member jurisdiction, but it's definitely possible. And so more importantly, it's good to have an understanding of what the expectations are in the role of being a public official in Colorado, because once you do get appointed, you know, by the town council to be a member of the HBC, you do become a public official for purposes of a lot of different laws that apply to how you do your work. So as Madison mentioned, what we do at CIRSA, in addition to just providing the coverages, was we provide trainings to elected and appointed officials. We try to get out about every other year or when there's new appointments to do training for our members. To give you a sense of our size, CIRSA is a member-owned, member-controlled insurance pool. We're not a commercial insurance company. We were created under Colorado law, and all we do is insure Colorado cities and towns and affiliated entities, like housing authorities, urban renewal authorities, that kind of thing. We've got 290 members within our self-insurance pool, that we're all in this collectively together. That's about 90% of the municipalities in the state of Colorado. So we insure almost all of the small municipalities, almost all of the smaller to mid-size and the mid-size to medium-large, but not the really large ones like the Denvers and the Colorado Springs, which frankly would probably be too big for a pooling system. You know, you kind of have this tail wagging the dog if you have a pool whose collective population is, you know, 1 million residents, and then you have one member who's got 1 million residents. That doesn't make sense for the pooling concept. So I am going to work off my slides, but we've got a small group, and I want to make sure that my presentation is as effective and helpful to you all as possible. So feel free to ask me questions at any time as you go through the material. For the folks who are online, I've turned off the little sidebar that shows your faces on my screen. So if you do have a question, just unmute or do whatever you need to do to get my attention or Madison's attention, and we can take questions as we go through. There are copies of the slides in your packet, I think, and I left 2 handouts at your places. The slides are, I apologize for this, but I also want to sort of pat myself on the back for this too. The slides are intentionally kind of dense in content, right? I sort of violated that rule, you know, and they tell you that when you do a PowerPoint presentation, you know, no more than 3 bullets per slide. Well, I'd like to leave the resource material behind as a reference. So in the slides, kind of break down in detail some of the concepts that we're talking about, okay? Let's see. I want to make sure that I can advance this. There we go. Okay. You can learn just as a little bit more by way of introduction. You can learn more about CIRSA at www.cirsa.org. There's on the homepage, there's a tab called Education and Training. If you click on that, there's a page called Elected Officials page. And that actually has some material for both elected and appointed officials that you might find of interest. I've listed a couple of the resources here. The most important thing that we're going to talk about tonight is the job, the part of the job where the 5 of you are judges. Did we know that when we signed up for the job? Yeah, that's the most important and highest risk part of the job. So we're going to talk about that. There's some resources on our webpage that I pointed out there with some more training on the judge aspect, right, of being an appointed official. Okay. So one disclaimer, however, you already started talking about your ethics issue that relates to something going on later tonight. It reminded me to make this disclaimer, though I am an attorney. This presentation obviously is for training purposes only and is not an attorney-client discussion. And I'm happy to give you CIRSA's thoughts on any questions that you have. But if my radar, you know, is telling me that question is kind of the live burning question that you have, that you need legal advice on, then that's for your town attorney. For Matt Meir is your town attorney and his firm, wonderful firm.
I'm not, Mike Sawyer, sorry.
Huh?
Mike Sawyer.
Mike Sawyer.
Yes.
I'm sorry. Mike's wonderful too. Sorry, I get my attorneys mixed up in my head.
It happens all the time.
And I've worked with them all too, because I was in private practice in Glenwood Springs before I joined CIRSA. So I know all the municipal attorneys up and down the various valleys around the state. So Michael and his team are great. But sometimes in trainings, people ask me a question. They go, "Sam, I got a question. You know, what if another member of the commission does this?" And everyone's like, "Wow, this is going to be exciting." discussion. That's my radar that's telling me, hey, you need to check in with Mike and his team for legal advice on that, okay? Same thing with staff, if I sense the question, because I don't know what's on your agenda, what your priorities are, what you're working on. If I sense it's like the current pending issue that relates to your work plan, right, or something like that, then that's for Madison and her team to help you out, okay? So in terms of risk management, actually, that's one of my main takeaways from my presentation. Are you all newer to the Historic Preservation Commission? Yeah, were appointed when, this spring or
Just in a couple months.
couple months
Couple
ago?
months, but I'm on planning and zoning also.
Yeah, so we met
Yeah.
a couple months ago, yeah.
Kelly, Ken, and Tracy have been on for 2 years.
Okay, but one of the main risk management tools that you have is to use your staff as a resource. They're there to help and support you, right? If you have questions from where you sit as the appointed officials, it's never, a silly question to contact your staff and ask that technical question. Why do we do things this way? Or what's the rule that applies here? Or, hey, I'm thinking about doing this, but I feel a little uneasy about it. Is it really something that I should be getting into in my role as an appointed official, right? And so they're there to help you as members and collectively succeed, right? And also to help keep you out of harm's way. So if you ever have questions about the role, the expectations for the role, the risks in the role, look to your staff as a resource to help support you in getting great things done from intern, right? And looking good at the same time, both in the eyes of your community and from our perspective, it sort of says staying out of harm's way, right? Because so much about local government, I admittedly, as a claims and insurance organization, I deal with a lot of stuff after it's hit the fan, right? But there's a lot that we can do that impacts the public's faith and trust in our work that never becomes a litigated claim, right? So it's really important to commit to best practices in how we do our work as appointed officials, okay? All right, so as I said, I want to focus on this aspect of the job that you have as judges, right? You've all been introduced to that concept of quasi-judicial decision-making, right? That the Historic Preservation Commission, its duties, kind of fall into two broad baskets if you look at your ordinance in the town code, the town ordinance that created the Historic Preservation Commission. On one hand, you do some big picture stuff, right? You work on making and adopting the Historic Preservation Plan, right? Last version's about 2 years old. Yep. So that's kind of policy making, broad visionary stuff for the community, right? Another policy making role, I think you did some work on this a couple of meetings ago, is where you review and make recommendations to the town council on general regulatory changes to your municipal code, right? And, maybe, I don't know what you looked at a couple of months ago, something to do with notice, right? Some notice provisions and some other things, I think. When you're doing that kind of work, just working on the ordinance, the general rules that apply to historic preservation, you don't have an applicant in front of you, right? You're just making general policy and rules for the town as a whole. So that's the big picture stuff, right? But the heavy lift in the job, right? And the riskier part of the job, and the one where frankly more eyes are upon you and there's more expectations about process and getting it right and doing the right thing the right way, is when you are making decisions that affect individuals' property rights. And those are things like the landmarking applications, right? And the certificates of appropriateness. I'm going to call them alteration, if that's okay, for ease of reference as we go through the material. But in that sphere, when you have those applications in front of you, that's a pretty awesome power, isn't it? I mean, we think about this, we got maybe 1,000 residents in the town of Minturn.
1,100.
And at the end of the day, there's 5 people on the Historic Preservation Commission and 7 people on council. So that's 12 people, right, that have the power to decide whether or not a property in town gets landmarked. And this has that overlay of restrictions placed on the property along with the benefits. And there's only 12 people who get to decide whether or not this or that request for alteration of a designated property gets to be made. So we have to understand that that's a pretty significant power, and there are certain expectations that go with exercising that power. And we want that. We want local control, right? We want the ability, and thank goodness we have it here in Colorado, where we have the ability locally under our own ordinances and our own systems to have a system of historic preservation with incentives, right? And also with regulatory restrictions. But when we affect individuals' protected interest in their own property, we have to understand that that grand bargain includes, with the power goes the obligation to make sure that we're honoring people's constitutional rights, including their due process rights. So that's what we're going to talk about, okay? When you make a decision concerning individual rights, whether an individual application in front of you, that's when you're acting in a quasi-judicial capacity, acting like a judge. And we'll break down what that means with one more apology. I hate the term quasi-judicial. It just sounds so weird, right? And it doesn't advance our understanding, in my mind, of what's really going on here, right? So what do you mean quasi? But it's an adjudicatory function, right? Where we're acting like judges and deciding specific applications that come in front of us. Okay, I think a good way to try to unpackage what this quasi-judicial role is about is to compare it to the policy-making function. And I'm going to borrow the role of town council here to kind of illustrate some of the points. If you compare this job of being a judge, deciding specific applications with the kind of legislative activities that come before the town council or you on occasion when you're making recommendations on a plan or on the town ordinances, you can see, right, that certain types of behaviors are okay, both individually and collectively. So a couple of months ago, I think you worked on some changes to your town code just with regard to the general criteria and the notice requirements, right? And that's a policy decision. Or adoption of the historic preservation plan is a policy exercise. And within that sphere, you know, in communicating with the citizenry and developing your own priorities and ideas and, you know, what viewpoint you want to champion, you can do all sorts of things. You can, you know, listen to the citizens when they contact you. You can talk to citizens out in the community, right? Get their views on historic preservation. You can investigate the issues yourselves, right? You can lobby and be lobbied. Let's say you're working on updates to the historic preservation plan, right? And there's a group of citizens in town that say, hey, you know, we want you within the historic preservation plan to contemplate greater incentives for landmark properties. That's a pure policy issue. People can lobby you about that. You can come to that issue with your own viewpoints. You can investigate that issue. You can work in advance, right? As long as you meet the open meetings law that we'll talk about in a minute. You can work in advance to see what kind of consensus you can build around those issues, right? And you can go on those kind of votes. You can vote your own personal convictions, your own personal preferences, you know, like that notice ordinance that you worked on. You could say, I'm going to vote no on this ordinance because I just don't like it. I can't stand it. It's just my own personal viewpoint, right? So those are the legislative things. And when you do those kinds of things, you know, as you see council do those things on any number of policy ordinances, what you're ultimately working towards is voting on, for you all, a recommendation on a policy issue that then is going to go up to council for final adoption. And so all those activities in red there on this slide, they come within the ambit of legislative activities where people are behaving like legislators, freewheeling policymaking, right? And for you, you're usually in that mode when you're working on the general historic preservation plan or making recommendations on general updates to the historic preservation code. You're doing that visioning work, big picture stuff. You aren't seeking to make a decision that affects an individual applicant who's in front of you, right? So that sets up that side of the job, right, that you do sometimes. But there are other times when you need to make decisions concerning requests, right, where there's a specific applicant in front of you. And I've listed the code sections, right? A request for a landmark designation and a request for an alteration to a listed historic property. Those are processes, right, under both your town code and under the Constitution, where you have the power to make the decision as judges. And so those are quasi-judicial proceedings. And in that mode, you need to think, I'm not a policymaker now, I'm a judge. And it's not a job for the faint of heart. Sometimes you're going to have once in a while, I hope you you don't have too many, but once in a while, you might have a very contentious landmarking hearing, right? Or a very contentious request for alteration of some historic property that's, everyone loves and doesn't want to see changed at all, right? In those situations, it's very important we make sure we follow the procedures that apply, right? And that both individually and collectively, before, during, and after the hearing, we do the things that judges do, and we don't do the things that judges wouldn't do. So we're going to break that down a little bit further here, okay? When you're in a quasi-judicial mode, that sort of policy approach is inappropriate, right? You're not supposed to be acting like a legislator. You're supposed to be acting like a judge. And in a quasi-judicial proceeding, let's break down what it consists of. A quasi-judicial proceeding is a process, right, where we provide additional notice to the interested parties. That explains why we put those signs up right around town. You have additional notice to the interested parties. We hold a public hearing, an evidentiary public hearing, where people come and provide their information and testimony to you. And then you all, as the decision makers, are required to make your decision based on the evidence presented at the hearing. Not based on your personal opinions, not based on the research that you did outside the hearing, not based on the lobbying that someone tried to do with you at the grocery store. It has to be based on the evidence presented at the hearing, and the interested parties are entitled to a decision by a fair and impartial decision maker, which is you all. Yes?
Question, Sam. So if during that public hearing, a critical fact has not been brought forward by an applicant or another person, can we raise them if it's a fact we feel is pertinent to the issue? And again, not an opinion, but a particular fact.
Yeah, I think it can get in the record, but I would prefer you not, and I have more on this in a minute, I would prefer you not be a witness in your own hearing. You're the judge. You don't want to be a witness or an advocate or a prosecutor. You want to be the judge. But I think the way you can get at that issue is by your questions, right? You don't want to come across as a judge offering leading questions or saying, I believe this to be true, because then you're offering facts in a hearing where you're the judge. Does that sound a little strange? From a due process point, it's definitely strange. Right, I'll give you that. I'll sort of accelerate the presentation and give you this example. What if the crux issue is somebody wants to do part of the historic elements we're trying to preserve is the nice lentailing and other features around some windows. And they come in, they want to replace the windows. And we're trying to work through the criteria. And they say, we're going to use this material, this construction material. But you know for a fact, right, from your outside life or other research, that material is no good, that it's failed, that the industry believes that material to be inferior. What if that's the whole crux issue for you? And what if you say, well, I get it that you want to use this particular material, but I'm very familiar with that material. I know it doesn't meet some of these standards. And, that's for that reason, I'm going to be voting against this application. Aren't you really saying, I as the judge am going to vote to deny this application based on the wonderful testimony of me? Sounds a little weird, right? And that's kind of jacked up from a due process standpoint. But what I think you can get to is you can ask questions. Hey, applicant, I understand that material might be inferior, or staff, I just have a question. I don't know this to be true for certain, but I have passing familiarity with this issue that I'd like the parties to inform me about this issue. Can you tell me, are there any problems with this material, that kind of thing? I think that's the better way to get at that issue, is during your questioning, right? And be careful of the leading question, right?
How is that not a leading question?
Well, that's kind of on the border, but at least gives people the opportunity, right? Yeah, because you haven't offered the facts yet. You asked the opinion, hey, I've heard, or I understand that, but you haven't gotten any credible evidence in yet, right? That's another thing to be careful of. I'm going to skip around a little bit, is what happens in that contentious hearing where you have the room full of people who are either saying vote yes or vote no, but the applicant's got an engineer. And the engineer testifies, hey, this can be done structurally, this all comports, it's not going impair the integrity of the structure, and these materials work from a technical standpoint, and that's the evidence that the engineer offers. But then, most of the people who stand up during public testimony say, you ought not to believe the engineer. I know that what they're telling you is not gonna work, that if you try to do this, there's gonna be some problems, and the main structural integrity of the building is gonna fail and it's gonna collapse. If you have one engineer and 10 people saying the opposite, what do you do with that? You have to ask yourself, do I have credible testimony, fact-based testimony by the group of saying, who are expressing an opinion, right? Or do I not, right? In that situation, I think you have to go with the testimony of the engineer. It's true that people have a strong opinion, but they haven't given you any credible professional engineering reason to question or doubt the evidence provided by the professional, right? So that, maybe planning and zoning sees that more often than you might, right? But that can become an issue, right? Where you have fact-based evidence that points to yes, but then you have opinion testimony that points to no. Or the opposite, but it usually runs that way. So you do, as the judges, have the authority to decide how you're gonna weigh the credibility of the evidence, but I give you the heads up that in that sort of situation, you're not weighing the credibility by saying, well, I had more people who disagree with the engineer than there were the engineer, therefore the engineer loses. There's no competent evidence supporting the opinion, there's just the opinion, right? Okay, any follow-up questions, thoughts on that? Okay, so the 4 elements of a quasi-judicial hearing: notice, a public hearing, a decision based on the record by a fair and neutral decision maker, and that's you. In terms of risk, the issues that we deal with at CERCE, here's kind of an interesting point. If we commit to best practices around those issues, right? We have a good hearing, we make our decision based only on the evidence presented, we apply the appropriate criteria, we're fair and impartial, and it's almost virtually certain that your decision will be upheld, right? If an applicant is disappointed or someone's disappointed in a decision, their main way to challenge that in state court is to file with the fancy number on here, 106A4. That's the method by which land use decisions can be challenged under Colorado law. And what it allows a person to do is to go to district court and make the argument that the decision of the HBC and town council collectively was arbitrary and capricious. But the legal standard is your decision will be upheld as long as there's any competent evidence that supports you on the substantive decision that you made, right? So landmarking, and we decide we're having a vigorous debate. There's people are in the margins arguing about, well, none of the landmarking criteria are met. And if there's only, and in fact, if it's even possible to landmark it, it's only its association with the historical event. That's one of the criteria. People are arguing vigorously about that. But some people put in reasonable evidence in favor of, yes, this is sites. It's not the district court judge's role or authority to say, well, I've looked at the substantive evidence and I really don't think that event was all that momentous. I don't think they should have done that, right? The judge is there to police process, to make sure that you based your decision based on the evidence, right? They're not going to second guess you substantively, but they are going to police what you did procedurally to make sure that you applied the criteria appropriately and so on. So that's the good news, right? Is that your decision can only be overturned if you exceeded jurisdiction or abused your discretion, and that's a very differential standard, okay? That's why process is so critically important. So people ask me, sometimes they say, why even have quasi-judicial process at all? Why can't every land use decision, every historical preservation decision be like a legislative decision? Why can't we just vote yes or no because of our own personal viewpoints, right? Or why can't we vote yes or no based on the number of people who in the audience who are in favor or against, right? It all goes back to an old familiar phrase that we all know: no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. So it's been well established for many decades, right? And when you're making decisions that affect the individual interests, right, of applicants, affecting what they can do with their property, that that's a quasi-judicial decision-making process, okay? So due process at its essence just means we need to provide a fair hearing before an unbiased decision maker, okay? So we're gonna dig into what that means to you both individually and collectively, and it's gonna feel kind of constraining, but the law does require, right, that you set aside certain ways of approaching issues and certain ways of behaving in favor of making sure we guarantee people their due process rights. And when we provide this training and when your town attorney says, no, don't do this, or, you know, you can't go to the neighborhood meeting about the application, or you can't talk to people about this, and you need to step aside if you have a bias, that kind of thing. When we emphasize the need to follow the due process, what I call rules of engagement, what we're trying to do, right, is ultimately protect your ability as one of those 12 people that has that power, trying to protect your ability to stay in the game and be one of the decision makers and not face a situation where at the beginning of a contentious hearing, someone stands up and says, before you start, Chair, I'd like to make an objection, and I'd like to ask that Commission Member, how do you pronounce the last name? Creasy. That Commission Member Creasy is obligated to recuse himself because I have evidence that he engaged in conversations with the applicant, or that he's got another bias, or he's prejudged the matter, right? And so to avoid that sort of situation requires us to make sure we follow the due process rules of engagement. We want to protect your responsibility to be a decision maker throughout the process. And then, of course, from CIRSA's perspective, we want to make sure that you're set up nicely in terms of defending any decision that was made against any challenge, including any procedural challenge, okay? And if we violate the due process of rules of engagement, that can jeopardize both those goals. So the good news about these legal principles is that if we have a fair hearing and we decide the matter through a fair and defensible process of applying the appropriate criteria, and we're unbiased and neutral about it, then state court's going to uphold your decision. And there's very little risk in that kind of situation that a claimant can try other types of legal tactics, right? But on the other hand, if it's clear that we're ignoring our own rules or that we're making a decision when we're biased or prejudged in matters, then it gets riskier because the claimant might try a federal constitutional claim. And in that context, the standards are not as deferential, right? And there's even the potential risk of a money damages claim, okay? All right, so summing all that stuff up, if we do our landmarking or our alteration hearings or other quasi-judicial proceedings appropriately, the decision is likely to be upheld. It's unlikely they'll have other types of recourse, like trying to bring a civil rights claim, right? But if there are procedural flaws, the claimant, might have a fair claim, okay? So all that is by way, I guess, in this summary comment, we need to recognize that the procedure that we follow is just as important as the substance, okay? You all don't wear a robe, so this judicial aspect seems a little weird, but it's adjudicatory decision-making at a local level. And I know and I appreciate and I'm sympathetic with the idea that particularly in local government and perhaps more so even in smaller towns, that your citizens expect you to be accessible. You agree? Yeah. And when there's a alteration application on the agenda, they probably still expect you to be accessible. And they want to talk with you about that application anywhere, anytime, on their terms. We agree with that? Sometimes they do that, right? Sometimes the applicant may want to call you up and talk to you about their application before the hearing, right? So we need to understand that those are kind of behaviors that we have to watch out for, right? Because in the legal realm, the judge, again, it isn't there to second guess the substance of what you decided, but when they look at claims that involve allegations of procedural flaws or misconduct or inappropriate conduct by the decision maker, the judge in the district court proceeding is going to look at it and say, well, these people are quasi-judges, so they need to behave kind of like I would as a judge. And so I'm going to hold up the lens and say that they, do the things that I would expect judges to do. So you want to have that think like a judge idea in your mind throughout the process for these specific applications when you've got a single applicant in front of you, okay? So here's some tips around all that stuff. In green here, let's see. One of the quasi-judicial rules of engagement, right, is that we have a fair and impartial, unbiased decision maker. That means don't make up your mind before the hearing. Keep an open mind. Don't make any prejudicial pre-hearing statements, right? I'll borrow from planning and zoning. You know, once in a while, maybe a planning and zoning member or a member of the town council, maybe you've got another application for yet another apartment building. And that's not what we want. We want more affordable, single-family housing. Well, you can't, as the judge, if you're gonna be reviewing the site plan for that application, you know, in the newspaper reporter calls you up, you can't be saying, we have enough apartments in town, I'm never gonna vote for another apartment building. That's not a fair judge, right? Or, and I got a scenario here that illustrates this in a minute. Make sure that as the judge, when we know that application is now pending, don't speak with either the applicant or the proponents or the opponents outside of the hearing. That's called an ex parte communication. And we're going to talk more about that in a minute. Obviously, don't participate if you have a financial interest in the outcome of the matter. That's under your code of ethics. We'll talk more about that in a minute as well. Do you ever have a pro or con, vote yes, vote no petition ever show up at your desk? Not yet? Okay. Well, if anybody's circulating those, right, don't sign those as the judge, right? It's just sort of awkward to be in that position to have your own name as the judge on a petition that says vote yes or vote no, right? We'll talk about segregation of roles in a minute, but just as best practice, I know that we're, part of the role is that as the HPC, even in the ordinance that establishes the HPC that says that we can assist and advise as a body, owners on the benefits of historic preservation and so on and so forth. But we have to be able to segregate our roles and make sure that when we're going to be making a decision on a specific application, that we stay away from being an advocate, right? Okay. We covered that one about don't be a witness in your own hearing, right? And then when you're deliberating, when it comes time, you know, after the end of the hearing, to start talking about the evidence, very helpful in terms of building faith and trust to show that you're talking and thinking like a judge. You don't want to say, I'm feeling this way, or I believe this. You know, it's better to say, hey, the evidence shows, the staff testimony was, the staff report leads me to the conclusion, the staff report leads me to find. That sounds more judicial, right? And it's helpful on the record. Oh, I should have mentioned this earlier. One of the reasons that process is very important from our standpoint, my standpoint at SURSA, is if we ever have litigation involving one of your decisions, the only record that we have that will ever be used throughout the entirety of that land use, of that challenge, is the record that was made in front of you as the commission and the council as the final decision maker. The transcripts of what you say and do in this room is what the defense of the claim is going to rise and fall on, right? So that's why I want you to make sure, we'll talk more about deliberations in a moment. That's why I said that judicial aura during your deliberations is also a good best practice, okay? All right, make sure that we discuss and consider quasi-judicial matters only at your duly noticed public hearing. Do you agree that's the lonely part of the job? Yeah, have you had any yet, you know, or something's coming up and somebody wants to peel you off at the local pub and say, hey, can I talk to you about that landmarking hearing that's coming up? Sure, people are going to try to do that, right? But this idea is you want to remember, hey, I hold the power to make the decision, but with that, as part of this grand bargain, is that I have to wait until it's in front of me, right? Or it's ripe for the commission, okay? No matter what the level of buzz is out there in the community, you don't want to dive into that, okay?
So if someone asks generic questions and they have no pending upcoming case, but they do either own an old house, can you, I mean,
Sure.
and they're just asking generic questions, how does the whole thing work?
Yeah,
But not specific stuff about their property. It's okay to talk.
that's absolutely fine, absolutely fine. You even point them to resources that you have, right? Dave, we got a website.
And if
we
there's
got-
specific questions,
Yeah.
I can point them to Madison.
Yep. Yeah, and those resources, that's part of the roles. We want to educate people on the benefits of historic preservation, on what the system is, right? Yeah, but if it turns to, they start asking a couple of preliminary questions and they say, well, They ask you their general questions. They own a couple of properties in town. They go, oh, thanks for that. But you do know that I own this property over at 310 Pine that's already designated. And I was thinking about, knocking off the north portion of the patio. I know that's part of what's earned it its designation, but what do you think about?
Would that be allowed?
Yeah. What
Do you think it'll pass?
Yeah, what are your thoughts on that? Wait a second. I'm gonna hold my powder for now. It's not that I don't want to hear about your project. I'm excited to hear about your project, but I can't engage with you with a discussion about what I think because I got to make that decision. And so I've got some more suggestions about talking points for dealing with those kind of communications. Okay. The other thing is, once your decision is done, let the decision speak for itself. That's pretty important, particularly in controversial decisions. But in all of them, the time that you express your opinions and you make your findings and you express your decisions is at the end of the hearing, when you talk as a commission, then you make your motion, right? Once that's done, somebody says, why'd you make that decision? Oh, well, you can find, do you put on your website the recordings of your meetings?
Recordings and the minutes.
Yeah, well, you tell them, well, there's a nice recording of the hearing on the website. I'm not trying to be difficult, but you can watch the hearing if you're interested in learning what we discussed as the commission. I'll give you a scorched earth example. It never gets this dicey, but I'll give you my real life story, and you can see how that if we don't just let the decision speak for itself, it can get kind of dicey. I once had a decision. It was a split vote. It was a 4-3 vote. And it was a project where there was a lot of community opposition against the project. And the 4 members of the city council who voted in favor of the project got a lot of heat after they voted in favor of the project. So much heat that they felt like they needed as the, their political heart got to them. They said, well, in a matter of building community trust and building a bridge, we need to do more to make sure the citizens understand why we voted in favor of that controversial application. So they wrote a letter to the editor about why they made that decision. What do you think? Good idea? Yeah, the problem from a risk standpoint, pure risk standpoint, is some of the stuff they put in the letter to the editor, they never said on the record. So now, did you repair community trust? Or did you just undermine it even more? Because now people are going, well, okay, so why did you vote for this? Is it what you said in the hearing or is it what you said in the paper, right? And of course, the person who was thinking of legally challenging this was going to say, oh, well, that's a due process violation, because they actually now admitted that they decided the way they did for reasons other than the ones that were part of the record. So that's the scorched earth example. But the thing is, particularly for controversial applications, have that good discussion, get all your thoughts about how the criteria apply, get all that on the record, work through that. No matter how difficult it seems, just having that discussion about the criteria, you'll get there. And then when you're done, you make your motion and you're done. And resist that temptation to say, people want to peel you off, particularly in that window right afterwards. Why did you decide that way, right? How do you communicate your decisions up to the council? Is that through motion?
Yes,
Yeah.
essentially, and then staff passes.
And then staff, yeah. So if staff's packaging what occurred at the HBC and sending it on to council, then let that piece do its speaking for you as well, right? In terms of the Madison staff report will say, here's what happened at the planning commission. Is that what it says?
Essentially,
Yeah.
here's the discussion.
And I think that's, because as one of the 5 members, you have that higher voice, but you want to be exercising that voice. I think the best practice is to exercise that voice individually during your deliberations at the HBC, and then collectively once the board speaks with its one voice and makes a decision. And by one voice, I don't mean decisions have to be 5-0. It's fine to have a 3-2 vote, as long as we work together to articulate what the decision is, and then we're willing to accept, right, even if we held the minority view, even if we voted against an application, we have to recognize that the commission has spoken, and that's the voice of the commission, right? Okay. Here's 2 real-life scenarios to illustrate some of these points, and then we'll keep moving from there. All right, let's say this first scenario, we recently approved, but I have to set this up. I don't know if you allow shared driveways in town. All right, I didn't know, but I went for it. And so my scenario here is based on the premise that of a shared driveway. So here's the scenario. We recently recommended approval as the HPC of an application for an alteration of a listed home where the owner wants to create a shared driveway with the neighbor, which is going to allow the property owner to move his driveway, create more front yard, more space for an addition. Now that addition is going to admittedly impact some portions of the home's historic facade, thus alteration application to you all, right? The neighbor during the hearing in front of you testified, hey, I'm in support of the application, I'm fine with that. I'm even willing to enter into a shared driveway agreement with the property owner. We haven't finalized it yet, but I'm willing to negotiate in good faith so we get a shared driveway. One of our members on the HPC who voted against the project, it was a 3-2 vote, decides after the hearing to approach the neighbor to convince him not to agree to the shared driveway. Good idea? Bad idea? What do you think?
Bad idea.
Bad idea. Yeah, what I'm trying to do there is illustrate that hat, you know, once we have to hold that position of appointed power, appointed official, it's really not as easy as we might think to take that hat off. You know, I hear quite a bit, oftentimes elected or appointed officials will say, well, I have First Amendment rights too. You absolutely do. But you're also an appointed official 24/7, right? And so in this scenario, the risk here to that individual is, yeah, he voted against the application, but he's a member of the same body that voted for it. And whether he liked it or not, that's the voice that was expressed by the commission. So he's got a fiduciary obligation, right, to not do things that affirmatively undermine the decision that was expressed by the commission of which he's a member, right? I had a similar, this is based on a real life scenario, which was even more concerning than this one. It was a planning commission member who went to a neighbor to try to convince him not to grant an easement, which was the main condition of approval. From the applicant standpoint, doesn't that applicant have an expectation from your body that you just allowed this project to go forward as long as they get the shared driveway, right? So in the scorched earth world that I deal with, the allegation was that was tortious interference with the prospective business opportunity for the property owner. So you have to be careful of that stuff. I fully admit you don't have to be the main cheerleader of a decision that you voted no on or disagree with, but you have a fiduciary obligation to respect the decision that was reached. And recognize also that we can't, you know, on a whim, reconsider decisions or reverse decisions. We can only do that, if at all, through a proper process. Okay? All right, how about this one? From prior comments, it seems that one of our members generally disfavors any alterations that replace historic elements of wood with synthetic materials. We have an upcoming hearing that proposes these kind of changes, and the member has been asking Madison to include in the packet detailed information about the inferior quality and aesthetics of faux historic elements. He's also been posting on social media about the upcoming hearing. What do you think of this risk scenario?
Not good.
Yeah, just in line with what I said, don't be a witness in your own hearing. That's unfolding where everybody can see it. I think it's still problematic to do it behind the scenes, perhaps even more insidious to do it behind the scenes, right? Now, on the other hand, if the packet comes out, I think you have the prerogative as the commission members, if you just have a question about process or a question about the contents of the packet, you can call Madison, sure. Say, hey, you know, the packet came out. I thought that as part of the application, there would be a structural report from an engineer. I didn't see one in the packet, but she can answer that, sure. But that, yes, you can see that's wholly different than you get the packet, it's recommending approval of something that's going to replace structural elements, and you say, no, I'm against this. What I want you to do is put a bunch more information in the packet that supports my view. That's improper kind of thing. Okay. What about social posting on social media? Is anybody active on social media? Oh, good for you. Good for you. All right. And are people in the community active on social media about the work you do,
Yes.
including applications?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's a tough one. 'Cause, you know, But if what's out there is on social media is germane to your application, right? Is that an outside the hearing communication to you? Right? Yeah. Okay, to keep it simple on this issue, what I would suggest you do is if you're scrolling, do you have a Nextdoor or, each community sometimes has these community weblogs. Do you have something like that in Minturn? On the Front Range, there's this social media program. Okay, good for you. Yeah, good for you. Yeah, Nextdoor is on. If you're looking through that stuff, you just, on your own time, and you see something that comes up about historic preservation landmarking application or alteration application, just stop looking at it. Push it out of your mind. Push it out of your mind. I know the citizens may show up at the hearing and say, hey, I want you to vote no, and I've been putting a lot of this information on social media. That's where Madison's going to jump in, right? Our staff is going to say, look, this is our hearing. This is where we provide information to the commissioners. I appreciate your comment that you're active on social media, but if you want the commissioners to hear your testimony, then this is your opportunity. It just makes the record so much easier to manage, protects you against this ex parte communication risk, that kind of thing, okay? Last piece I'll say on social media, I hope knock on wood that this never happens to you. What if you're scanning social media and somebody does say something about an upcoming landmarking proceeding, and it's just patently inflammatory and false, and it's disinformation and your blood is boiling over that? What do you want to do with that?
Burn their house up.
Yeah. Yeah. Nothing you can do about that. Nothing you can do about that. We have to, I think as public officials and public entities, we have to think pretty critically about the when, how, and where do we take the opportunity, if we think we want to take it, to correct this information. And I think from where you sit as appointed officials, take solace in the fact that that wasn't part of your job description. That you don't have to expect that that's your obligation. But if you do see something like that and it troubles you, let your staff member know. And maybe staff, for a lot of controversial applications, what some communities will do is they'll just put something on the website. That'll help the people who want to go find information, right? It gives you something to point to. When somebody says, how come you're not responding to my direct message to you on Facebook? I want to talk to you. You say, well, I can't talk to you about it, but if you click on the city's website, town's website, there's a page there for the Historic Preservation Commission, and there's some information about the upcoming hearing on that application. And you're done. And you're done. You've been able to run interference, protect you to stay in the mix, and unburden you with that sense that you have to sort all this out, because you really don't feel like you have to do that stuff. But I know, do you all feel like in this day and age, it's like people want to know yesterday what's going to happen tomorrow? Yeah, we're just content mongers as humans. We always want to know where this is going and when, but we want to be a champion of the HPC's process, right? So if ever those things come up and you're feeling uneasy about it, just say, look, we have a process for that. Get in touch with our staff, and they can explain the process. They can tell you where you can find information. I, as the decision maker, I'm just staying out of this until we get to our our HPC hearing on whatever it is, November 1st, and look forward to seeing you then. Right? Okay. So that's that on that. I think a lot of that covers these couple of next slides about ex parte communications. And ex parte communication is just a fancy Latin word, I think, for outside the hearing communication. And the constitutional principle in play here is that the decision makers, the judges, should not be having outside the hearing communications with interested parties about the subject matter that will be under consideration at the hearing. So that's why general questions is okay, right? But if it turns to the core issues that are coming up in that hearing, that's why you have to stay away from those. Okay? I've listed some examples there. Things that would constitute an impermissible ex parte communication would be meeting with the alteration application outside the hearing to discuss pros and cons. Going to the neighborhood meeting where people are lining up to support or oppose the application, right? Good way to look at these things is if it were your application for your own property, would these things seem fair if the decision makers were doing that, right? So, and those kinds of activities seem more like an advocate type of role than a judge type of role, okay? This slide just talks about the legal aspects that are related to that. Here's what I would suggest to you. When you're ever faced with someone who wants to come up to you and talk to you about an application that's coming up on your agenda, is have a talking point ready, right? And say, hey, thanks for reaching out about this issue, and thanks for your interest in that, upcoming landmarking hearing, but I can't talk with you about it right now. It's not that I don't want to hear from you as a HPC, commissioner. I'd love to hear from you. But as the decision maker on this application, I can only engage with folks at our hearing. And please trust me that that's everyone, not just you, but the applicant, the proponents, the opponents. The whole point is I, as the HPC commissioner, need to make sure that I'm helping ensure that everybody gets a fair hearing. So, love to hear from you, but I can't talk to you right now. Please plan on coming to the hearing if you can. If you can't come to the hearing, please, if you have thoughts on the application, you can email them to our planning department. And I saw you have a good little system there, right? There's a deadline and email comments in. Yeah, encourage people if they want to give you their thoughts on it. Hey, you can send us a quick email, and I assure you it becomes part of the packet that we read. So I will see your comments, right? The danger is just doing it outside of the hearing, right? Okay.
Sam, can I ask, this is Ken, can I ask you a quick question on
Oh, hi,
this?
Ken, yes.
Yeah, so it's clear when you have a hearing set, but what if it's before a hearing set and somebody's just trying to pick your brain, but there's no hearing? Oh, there we go.
There you go. There you go. I would ask, talk to Michael about this question or and Madison. My 290 members have somewhat different views of this issue of when does the prohibition kick in. Excuse me. Thought it took a sip to help me. Now it's actually having the opposite effect. It's a somewhat fluid issue, and I can illustrate it this way. I used to have a lot of when I was a city attorney. Sometimes developers, attorneys, or applicants' attorneys would tell me the ex parte prohibition kicks in on the day the application is filed. And I always thought, well, it can't be that simple. What if the day before the application is filed, the applicant comes up to you and says, hey, tomorrow I'm going to file my application, but I really want to talk to you today and tell you why you ought to vote yes. Are we in the clear from a constitutional standpoint? It's just more, like so many things in law, it's a little more nuanced, right? A little fuzzier than that. So you all in good judgment know when you need to have your antenna up. I think I'd look at it more substantively, Ken. Once you hear that question that you know is coming from a place of they're trying to get you to play your hand, whether they have an application in or not, then you kind of want to step back from that. That would be my 2 cents. But ask Michael and your staff, Madison, about how we ought to handle those issues. And it's a continuum, because I do realize, particularly for HPCs, there is this kind of role of educating the community, right? In fact, that's one of the listed powers and duties of the HPC. But you all can sense that continuum from general questions about how historic preservation and incentives and landmarking works, right, to that mid-range question, hey, what's the process and criteria that apply to a landmarking, to, hey, I'm on the agenda for a landmarking, can I talk to you, right? Is that helpful, Ken?
Yeah.
Yeah. There is under the law, just to give you a sense of the legal piece of this, I do know that, part of the job is educating people, but ask yourself, I know that HPC members can nominate a property, right? But at what point do we run the risk of being perceived of not being the judge, but of being more of an advocate or someone who's being perceived as working on an application to a point where it's raising concerns about prejudgment bias? What do you think of that issue? That's a tougher one, right? Yeah.
Yep.
Under the eyes of the law, there is this separation of duties principle that where elected or appointed officials have different hats. Some days they're a legislator doing policy stuff, and some days they're a judge. The law is going to presume that you can carry out those duties appropriately, wearing the appropriate hat at the appropriate time, right? But you want to sort out what that means to you, right? So I think, for example, I don't want to get too close to what you got going on later tonight, but among your powers and duties, you have the ability to nominate, right? But then if I nominate, am I a decision maker? Am I the person who, can I prosecute the application? Can I present the application? Right? And I think in those kind of situations, transparency is important, right? And sorting out where the line is with your staff is helpful, okay? So, is that helpful? Does anybody have questions? Is anybody gonna ask me the live one about the nomination you got later tonight? Sounded like you kind of sorted that out, because somebody made a disclosure already that you nominated and that you weren't gonna
Oh, yeah.
vote. That seems to me to land kind of in a good place, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That assumes this, that no one has a direct financial interest in the application, correct? Yeah. Yeah, I think more would be required under your code of ethics if you had direct substantial financial interest in the application.
If
Yeah.
you did, then how would it play out?
I think you would want to recuse yourself completely.
Like,
right.
remove yourself from the room.
Yeah.
How about if I'm losing money in the process?
Yeah.
Which is more likely.
Well, there's always opportunity cost to being on the HPC, right? But your community.
No, he means volunteering to actually do the manual labor to get
Yeah.
the thing moved.
Yeah,
And some of
yeah.
us are donating money to it. So there's several of us losing money, and to use Kelly's words.
Oh, okay, I see, gotcha, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
It's not, nobody's gaining a benefit other than a feeling good about it.
Yeah, okay, and no one's bearing direct financial risk of loss or gain.
No.
Yeah, proposal under consideration. Yeah, if that ever comes up.
Are you gonna, Sam, are you gonna talk about, Madison, maybe you can help me, but from some training we had early on, there was some rule about it's a meeting if there's more than two members. Obviously, if there's
Yes.
something pending, you can't talk to each other, obviously. But if it's just on, hey, I want to talk to Kelly about an idea for, HPC or something, and we're just having a conversation about the future of HPC that's not related to anything pending or that we think's coming up. But if there's two, or if there was some rule about doing that kind of conversation.
Yes.
Thank you. What is it? Can you
We're gonna
remind us?
talk about the open meetings law, the rule 3 in just a moment. Yep.
Okay,
But
I
to
can
give
wait.
you, Yep, to give you a sense of where that's going, the constitutional requirement to avoid ex parte communications is a layer of higher standards that goes above and beyond the open meetings law. So even though the open meetings law doesn't kick in until you have 3 or more members, for specific applications, when you're doing that judge work, you don't want to have one-on-one conversations with each other as judges. That would be that higher constitutional expectation that the judges are not talking together even one-on-one about a pending application, okay? That
Right.
makes sense? Yep.
Yeah.
Recognize, make sure you look at your code of ethics. You actually have something in your code of ethics about ex parte communications too. Yeah. Sorry.
So I have actually a specific question. If a realtor, I'm an architect, realtor approached me and said, hey, can you draw up, very rudimentary massing plans, elevations of what could be built on this property, neglecting any historic preservation possibility. It's not been applied for or anything. It's just saying, like, what is the potential for development on this property? It is a property that if it were ever altered would likely it'd be nominated, whether it would ever actually end up in front of us or not, I don't know. But if I did that work for the realtor, just like, hey, this is what you could build there, and without offering any opinion about the historic preservation aspect, if it later became a historic preservation issue or was raised to the community and was nominated and then someone wanted to demolish it, would I have to then recuse myself at that point?
Do you have an ongoing relationship?
If I just did this one thing for the realtor, not for the client, not for the owner.
Yeah, then all that work is for the ultimate benefit of the owner, right? Of the
Probably,
property, yeah. So again, check with Michael, but here's my thoughts on this issue, is if it's a one-time transaction that's in the past, right, you don't have a direct financial interest, you're not currently under contract to do the work for the property,
Sure.
then I don't think that your code of ethics is gonna obligate you to recuse. It may not even obligate you to disclose, but in terms of transparency, small community, people know,
Yep.
hey, didn't he do work for the owner's representative who's here to present this application. So don't underestimate the value of a curative disclosure. You know, maybe at the beginning of that hearing, you say, Chair, before we start, I just want to make a disclosure. I don't have an actual conflict of interest. I don't have any financial tie to this application or this landmarking request or to the property. But I thought it important just to put on the record that I had in the past, right, done some work for some drawings for this property. That's a separate issue. I have no ongoing financial interest or relationship to this property. I want to assure everyone that as a commissioner, I can carry out my obligations as a commissioner fairly and impartially, and I intend to treat this application like any other. I just wanted to clear the air, because I know some people in the community know that I had done some work or had asked, what's my relationship, knowing that I had done some drawings in the past. And I think that's helpful.
Contrary to that, if I had an agreement with the owner to design something for them, that'd be a totally different, then I'd be recusing myself.
Yeah, and if you've started,
Yeah.
but even haven't inked that consulting contract, if you're in discussions for a prospective engagement for work later on after they get approvals, I think that's,
Okay.
again, check with Michael, because I don't know your
No,
ins
that's
and outs of your codes.
Like
but
maybe I'm not even under contract, but they've asked me, hey, would you put together?
Yeah, a lot of codes in the state law, your home rules, so you have your own code of ethics, but the state law says employment engagement for which negotiations have commenced, right?
Right.
It doesn't matter that there's actually a firm legal expectation of compensation.
At that point, then it'd be full recusal.
How about if you would, I'm a carpenter
Yeah.
and designer, but how about if you had worked on a house many years in the past?
Yeah, you can get.
And
to
then
a
it's
point of
coming up
remote- yeah, you can
to-
get to a point of remoteness where people wonder why you're making it the disclosure. But yeah, if you've done work in the past too, and people know that, they know you're out and about, you know, it probably doesn't hurt from a transparency standpoint to again say, hey, just want to let everybody know I don't have any interest in this. I've, you know, looked at the code of ethics, want to make sure just because people know that I work in the community, I want to make it clear that yes, I have worked on this house before, but as a HPC member, I don't have any interest, I don't have any actual conflict. Just wanted to make sure everybody understood I don't have any relationships to this application at all, other than I'm here tonight as the planning commissioner and I intend to apply the criteria correctly.
Okay, thank
Yeah,
you.
those are good. Those are good. They're nice to have for me, because sometimes what survives a hearing, particularly contentious ones, is a suspicion.
Right.
And then a suspicion turns into an allegation, turns into a notice of claim, turns into a lawsuit. And then we go to look at the record, right? And I always go in that point, well, the plaintiff never presented any firm evidence of an actual conflict. But even more helpful is like, well, we tamped down, we addressed head on this so-called speculation or gossip in the hearing. And the only thing in the transcript is a clear articulation by the public official that they have no conflict of interest. And there is no other evidence, hopefully, right? Obviously, if the opposite is true, it's not going to save you to make that comment, but yeah, in terms of saying that, it's very helpful to community faith and trust, I think. Because you know how it is, somebody go, why are they up there? I thought they did. You just tamp it down by making the disclosure,
Mhm.
right? Yeah.
Thanks, Sam.
Yeah, thanks. Okay, let's see here. This is going to introduce the concept of meetings. Then we'll start chatting about, before I leave ex parte communication, so check your own code of ethics in section 2-4-70 of the town code. You have a specific rule that says an appointed official shall not make or accept an ex parte communication or contact concerning a matter which is to be determined after a public hearing without making that contact on the record. So again, you want to avoid it, but if it occurs, let's say it occurs this way, you're at home and somebody sends you an email on your own personal email address. With all these reasons why you ought to vote no on this application, what do you want to do with that? You didn't invite it, but the communications occur. It relates to the substance of the hearing. So it is an ex parte communication. So what are you going to do with that?
Don't read it.
Don't read it, send it to Madison, right? But if you read it, you got partway through and you go, oh, shoot. Then at the hearing, you say, hey, I just want to disclose an ex parte communication for the record. I want to let everybody know that on October 14th, Sam Light sent me an email regarding this application, but I've sent it to staff and I understand it's in the record for this evening's proceeding. Is that right, Madison? Yes. And that cures the problem, because now it's in the record, and anybody else who wants to read it, argue about it, tell you why you should disagree with whatsoever said in that email, they have now the opportunity in the evidentiary hearing to do that. Yeah. So you'll never have this, but in a lot of the issues that we see that get dicey, there's a lot of gamesmanship that goes on with ex parte communication. So just keep your radar up for that. People sending you things last minute, people sending a communication to just one of you without you knowing whether others are getting it. Somebody trying to disqualify you through ex parte communications, right? So again, if it's ever one of those weird things, feels like something weird's going on here, contact staff. They'll see if legal needs to get involved. They'll help extricate you, hopefully in a way that preserves your ability to stay in the game and be a decision maker. That's what you all volunteered, thankfully, to do. Yeah. Okay. What about this scenario? So Commissioner Nile, I apologize. No one has the first name Nile, do they? Okay. Try to scrub these and make sure I get them right. All right. Commissioner Nile is not able to attend the meeting next week. We're going to have a public hearing on a controversial landmark application. Over the weekend, he emails Commissioner Tammy to tell her to vote no, because he disagrees with the idea of landmarking property other than with the application by the owner. Tammy responds to Nile and copies in a third commissioner, telling them both that she disagrees with the staff report because she doesn't agree with the suggestion that the property is eligible for designation based on connection with persons significant in history, which, by the way, is the only eligibility criteria that's going to apply, if any. Bruce then responds back on this email thread, copies in the two other commissioners, adding, hey, there's a lot of social media buzz around this application, and people around town don't want to see this property demolished. What do you think? Do we have, let's talk about the potential issues. Do we have an ex parte concern?
Yeah.
Because judges should not be debating
Yeah.
an application until they've heard the evidence. Then introducing this piece, this is where, Ken, we have the open meetings issue. So as as appointed officials in Colorado, you're all subject individually and collectively to the open meetings law, right? And it basically says this: whenever 3 or more commissioners meet to discuss public business, that's a meeting that has to be open to the public. Simply means the citizen has a right to observe that discussion. And the second major rule under the open meetings law is that if you're going to make any kind of decision that includes any kind of resolution, ordinance, motion, recommendation, that can only occur in a duly noticed meeting of the HPC, in this room, right? So those are the two main requirements under the open meetings law. In fact, you can only take action at a duly noticed public meeting, okay? So that's a rule of 3. The openness requirement kicks in when it's 3 or more, but the due process expectation, the due process requirement kicks in even for one-on-one discussions. That's why I say on the policy matter, Ken, it's just fine, absolutely fine for 2 members of the HPC to sit down and say, hey, we're going to start working on updates to the historic preservation plan. What are your thoughts? What are the items on your tick list? And you can sit down and have coffee and do that. That's fine. And no citizen has the right to be there for that. But you can't sit down for coffee and say, hey, let's go over this landmarking application. Okay?
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right. So what about this? It's a rule of 3, and we fight like this for that rule all the time in litigation, because I used to be a municipal attorney, and we got to have the ability, part of the job is we got to have the ability to, on legislative matters, get to know each other. And it's okay to have that one-on-one discussion. So I realize that's part of the job. It's a rule of 3. The openness requirement only kicks in when it's 3 or more members, except for quasi-judicial. One-on-one's okay. What do you think about one-on-one on one-on-one on one? Right?
In series is not.
Yeah, that's the idea of a serial meeting. That also is not okay, right? you know, and it's very disconcerting to the citizens. We're in legislative mode and we're making some recommendation on updates to the historic preservation criteria, it's very disconcerting to the citizens and a violation of the open meetings law if we just show up at the meeting and we say, well, I'm just gonna make a motion to approve this recommendation to the council for changes to the ordinance, because we've already talked about it to death. So I just make a motion to approve. What's the citizens do? They're gonna wanna know when and where did this conversation occur? I thought the whole point of the open meetings law, which it is to shine light on your deliberations. And it may not feel like, you know, people wanna be a part of that sometimes, but sometimes an empty room is because people have faith and trust in what you're doing. But they also have an expectation that you deliberate, right, on your policy issues collectively in this room. You know, and maybe they're comforted because they can watch the video at night and understand, you know, they may not show up here. But it's absolutely the legal requirement that the deliberations about the merits and substance of all the policy issues that you've got going on have to occur within your public meetings, okay? All right. I may need to, my battery's running low, it says, so I don't know if you want to queue up the presentation on your screen, and when we die, we can just switch over.
Sure.
'Cause we're getting there, we're just about, we're gonna wrap up in a couple of minutes. Okay, on ethics, we do separate ethics presentations, but I want to make sure, take a look at your town code and work through the ethics rules there so that you have a good expectation, good understanding of what the expectations are, right? We obviously know the main conflict of interest rule, that if the commission is going to make a decision or a recommendation that affects your own personal financial interest, then you have to recuse yourself, right? And you have to make that recusal on the record at the HPC meeting. You say, Chair, I'm going to step away. I actually own this historic property. I'm the one applying for the alteration certificate. I'm going to step away from the board's discussion and vote, right? Do you leave the room at that point? What do you think? Yeah. Yeah, I think that's probably the best thing. I don't know what your code actually says on that issue, but in this situation, I think the best thing to do to stay completely out of harm's way is to have someone else represent your interest, whether it's your business partner or the architect that you hired or the whatever it may be, right? Someone else, so that as the person who has two hats, the private interest and the public official obligation, you're never in that situation where you could be alleged to have attempted to improperly influence the other decision makers, right? So it may sound unfair, but it is that balance between the expectations of a public official in Colorado, right? And the ability to pursue your own interests. Okay. Let's see. Did we switch over perfectly? Seamlessly?
No, this is still your screen.
Oh, well, my machine died, so we may need to switch over. to yours.
Oh, okay, so maybe it's just frozen, so let's see if I can force it.
Yeah, I'm gonna stop sharing real quick, but I'm gonna keep going to be respectful of your time. And then if you could pull it up on yours.
Yes.
Okay. And then I think the other important thing is we talked about already, if there is some suspicion or concern that you have an ethics issue, but you actually don't have an obligation to recuse yourself, that idea of a disclosure is helpful, right? Because, you know, fair or unfair isn't a measure of ethics like reality equals perception and perception equals reality, right? And so if there's a perception out there, I think it's a good thing just to address it head on, right? All right, two other ethics rules just to mention real quickly. Recognize that as appointed officials, town officials, you do have an obligation to protect confidential information. You probably won't come across confidential information that much, if at all, is that right?
Not much.
Yeah, but if you ever do, just remember that you don't have no individual member has the right to disclose confidential information. And then gifts, you've got some rules under your code of ethics about gifts. The best way, in my way of looking at this, just in terms of giving 40,000 foot level best practices suggestions, is so much about gifts is just understanding the timing and the context. We're a small town, we've got friends, we know people in the business community, we probably even have holiday dinners with them. But if that person who's a family friend is the one who next week has an application for an alteration certificate in front of you, not a good look. Timing and context is not right to this week be accepting, you know, tickets to the Broncos game from them. Just not a good thing. There's more nuanced rules and there are exceptions to the rules, so check those out. Okay, can we go to the next slide? Okay, last substantive piece about decision making that I want to talk about is recognize the critical importance of your deliberations as the commissioners, right? You've held your hearing, heard from staff, the applicant, the public. The deliberations are the critical part where you as the commissioners get to take what you've learned at the hearing, hold them up against the criteria, and have that discussion together as the commission about how you're going to decide, okay? Critical piece of the process because that's where you formulate the reasons for your decision. And in a legal context, that's where the judge is going to look to figure out why you decided the matter the way you did, okay? So in deliberations, let's go to the next slide. Make sure we focus on the existing legal standards. No matter how much you've personally like or dislike an applicant or an application or want this or that to happen, the obligation as the judge is to make sure you're applying only the criteria that are in the Historic Preservation Code. So have those at the ready. It's a great point in the process to pick up the staff report and begin focusing on those crux issues. If we're landmarking, it's like the whole issue to me is, does this meet the eligibility for criteria for having been associated with a significant person in history? I'm really on the bubble about that. Staff, let's go through that again, or fellow commissioners, let's talk about that more, right? And that's going to serve you very well, okay? If you have questions, what you're doing is asking questions to help you plug in, fill in the gaps as a decision maker, right? You don't want to ask leading questions. And you want to have your questions focused on the criteria. Let's go to the next slide. Next one. Probably the best way that I illustrate this, I hope, is to say, I get that sometimes you'll get an alteration certificate and you'll have a tough hearing and maybe the deliberation starts off a little rocky, you know. Maybe I'm the commissioner and I say, Chair, yeah, Ken, I'll start the board, I'll start our commission discussion. This alteration certificate request, you know, I know we've heard a lot of different testimony and differing opinions, and I'm just going to vote no because I don't like it. Yeah, we're kind of off to a rocky start, right? But we can fix that just by using what I call Sam's rule of why. We just ask each other as commissioners during the discussion, why do you find that to be the case? Why is that your conclusion? And this illustrates that. You know, we have a rocky start. I say, Ken, I'm going to vote no because I don't like it. Someone can just ask me, well, why do you intend to vote no? And then I'm going to vote no because it doesn't meet our standards. Now we're getting somewhere, but keep going. Another layer, the next rule of why. Sam, why doesn't it meet our standards? You know, I have concerns about whether it meets our eligibility criteria as well, but why don't you tell me what your concerns are and we can discuss those in relation to our criteria and what's magically happening. We're drilling down to a granular level discussion of why that application meets or does not meet the specific criteria in the code. You know, maybe I say, well, yeah, I'm going to vote no because it doesn't meet our standards. And in particular, I don't think this proposed alteration complies with the Secretary's specific treatment standard that requires that new additions must preserve the building's historical character. But you're going to go even further than that. Because you're going to say, Sam, why don't you think that specific standard's met? And that's a great way to get to a very successful conclusion of the hearing to get to a defensible decision. Okay? All right. Any questions, thoughts about that? One or two more items. You know, this is mostly comments for the chair, but, you know, as decision makers, you're all co-equals, right? Make sure everyone has equal opportunity to participate in the deliberations. Make sure it's a supportive environment. No matter how different my view might be than another commissioner, everyone on an appointed public body ought to feel like, you know, it's a comfortable place where I'm free to express my viewpoint on an issue, no matter how different it may be than someone else's. That we're respectful even if we disagree, right? And that we're actively listening, okay? Make sure that, particularly probably the nicest one from a claims perspective is staff is recommending approval, but you want to recommend denial. You want to make sure that you put on the record, right, why you're doing that, and they need to be defensible reasons for doing it, right? And if all the evidence points to we must recommend approval, then you just can't recommend denial. You got to go where the evidence leads you. Okay. Any questions about assessing evidence or credibility or those kinds of things? Let's go to the next slide. Another piece is particularly in controversial hearings. Sometimes I've seen groups, they have the temptation because it was kind of a very emotional or high intensity hearing. After the hearing's over, everybody wants to leave, everybody leaves the room, and then we want to talk about it more. Good idea?
No.
No. You make your decision. We made a great decision. We had a good discussion, good deliberation. We did our best. We made our motion. We're done. We're moving on to the next agenda item. Avoid the temptation to talk about that application later in the meeting. You don't want to do that. That's all fodder for controversy, okay? And potential legal problems. All right, let's go to the next one. Just a few pointers about hearings. You all feel like you have a good process for how you get through your hearings? Yeah, you want to use a script, use a standard way of doing things. Your historic preservation ordinance, look through that every now and then and remind yourselves, oh, we've got a system and procedures in place. But your ordinance actually, the historic preservation ordinance leads you to another section of the town code that actually says this is how the public hearing goes. This is the order, right? And we want to, as commissioners, make sure we're championing that process. So for example, when it's the applicant presentation, right, we don't want to be engaging them in a back and forth discussion. We want to let them make their presentation, right? When it's time for deliberations, that's for the commission. Even if someone's, what if during your deliberations, I'm in the back of the room waving my arms? Commissioners, I've got something I want to say. How do we want to deal with that one, Ken? The person who wants a second bite of the apple after public comment.
It's closed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the problem they run into, you want to have an efficient hearing and you want to get through as the commissioners, you want to have an efficient hearing and get to wherever you're going. The trouble can come up if you give one person a bite at the apple. What if another person then starts waving their arms, right? You want to have people when they stand up to speak, you want them to direct their comments to you. You're the decision makers. You don't want to be having a back and forth with them. You just want to give them their 3 minutes to provide, or 5 minutes, whatever it is, to provide their testimony. You want to discourage them. Sometimes people during public comment, they'll say, thank you for the opportunity to comment, Mr. Chair, and they'll turn and they'll want to start talking to people in the audience. You have every right as the chair to recalibrate that and say, hey, please direct your testimony to us as the commission, right? Sometimes they'll surprise you and say, Mr. Chair, I'd like to cross-examine the applicant. What are you going to do with that? Right? You may have local rules, but typically it's, well, no, this is what we have for this adjudicatory hearing is you have an opportunity to present evidence and testimony to us. So this is not a formal courtroom where the rules of cross-examination apply, but you have 3 or 5 minutes or whatever it is to give us any information that you would like to give us. The other danger that I've seen in real life is what I call the ship's passing. You ever have a scenario where somebody says they're opposed to an alteration request, but what they're really mad about is the whole idea of landmarking to begin with. And so they stand up during the alteration hearing and they say, Chair, you ought to vote no because this property should have never been landmarked in the first case. Isn't that kind of like ships passing? That's not what's on the agenda tonight. Right, so you have every right as the chair, and this is helpful at the beginning of the hearing to remind people, hey, tonight on the agenda we have an application for a certificate of appropriateness for this particular property. All right, the issues that we're going to consider are the criteria for appropriateness review within our code. This is not a landmark hearing, that kind of thing. But sometimes people will want to talk about policy or talk about something that's not on the agenda during the public hearing, and you have every right to recalibrate that. Okay? Ask people to be recognized before they speak. You don't want people talking over each other. What else? Civility is okay? We're all good with civility? sometimes in this world, you know, and people are talking about people's property rights. Emotions can run high, right? People can be passionate about it, right? But if ever it gets to the point of getting uncivil, you know, the chair has tools and techniques that you'll use, Ken, to remind people, hey, be respectful and courteous. Let's all give each other equal time and respect each other, that kind of stuff. If it ever really gets dicey and you feel like this is on the verge of spinning out of control, then I would recommend you just take a recess and take a couple-minute recess. Okay? Any other questions around meeting process? Yes.
One thing you haven't addressed here, but or at least I don't remember you addressing it, but we use often when it goes to decision that rather than necessarily deny something or postponing it, we can come up with conditions.
Yes.
Which helps the application continue on without having to put extra time in that. That's capable of doing that here too.
Yeah, your ordinance in the code does allow you to approve, recommend approval, denial, approval with conditions. A couple of things about conditions. The conditions have to be legally supportable.
Right.
Okay, we can't make up a condition that isn't grounded in our ordinances. And I'll use an absurd example, but I hope it illustrates the point. You say, well, I'll go ahead and vote for this alteration certificate, but I'd like it conditioned upon the approval that the applicant include an EV charging station as part of the project. If your code doesn't require that for development generally, we can't just create that authority out of nowhere to begin imposing conditions that have no connection to our underlying authority, right? So that's one thing about conditions. The second thing about conditions is if you're drafting them on the fly, you know, look to your staff, right? And make sure that they're comfortable with the language that you're working up for the condition. Make sure the language is clear. Staff's going to tell you whether or not it's a supportable condition, right? If I was the one, Sam came up with a crazy idea of the EV charging station, then Madison's going to jump in and say, Commissioner Sam, I just want to remind you, there's nothing in our ordinance or criteria that enables us to impose that kind of condition. So we need to look at something else. But make sure the language is clear with this legal thought in mind. I call it conditioner's remorse. We don't want to wake up the next morning and be wondering what that condition meant, right? So even if it gets complicated and we need time to work out the specific language, I would instead suggest continue the hearing for one meeting so that we can work on the language and make sure it's correct, reflects what our intent is consistent with our authority, and is defensible, right? Rather than trying to do it at 11:30 at night when we're all kind of, you know. And then last thing, conditioner's remorse runs all directions. Sometimes applicants the next morning will wake up and go, why did I agree to that? Just recognize that legally they don't lose their right to challenge a condition simply by nodding their head at 11:30 the night before when someone suggests this condition. Right, so same mental exercise. This is a defensible, clear condition. And then the last thing on conditions is remember that your obligation as a decision maker is to make a decision on the application that was presented to you, not the application that you would prefer you have. And the way that relates to conditions is, yes, there is some leeway to craft conditions, right? But if what's really going on is you're rewriting the application and you're trying to force that upon the applicant, right? What you really ought to be doing is backtracking and say, okay, I get it. You're saying you want to proceed with this. There are no conditions that can save this application. We're going to go back to deliberating on the application that you presented. We'll make our findings, conclusions, and recommendations based on that application. I mean, I've seen in my 25 years of doing this, I've seen people write conditions that basically, and try to impose them on the applicant, that it didn't advance the ball. Because what happened was, it made the project impossible, and there was just a new application submitted anyway. And you were right back to where you were, because the applicant said, I never wanted to do that. I was just trying to get through that hearing process. Does that make sense? Do you have any thoughts on that stuff? Okay. Okay, because you're the one that gets to craft conditions of approval.
Yes.
Okay, I just didn't know if there are other practical things going on we ought to keep our eyes up for.
I have one more.
Yes.
And I've spoken with staff and I've spoken with Michael. I'm in a unique position here because never before has one person been on, from my understanding, on two commissions. And because there may be an occasion, although it would be very rare, that something here would be crossing with my position on planning and zoning.
Mhm.
I know what they're recommending. Do you have any advice to that?
Follow their advice.
That's good enough. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah, that is interesting. There is this segregation of duties, and I think just for transparency, right? And making sure you're being faithful to the hat that you're wearing at the time, that you can navigate through those things. Make sure you always understand the code of ethics, but you're not prohibited from being dual member, right? Yeah, you just have to sort out, make sure I understand what role am I playing, and am I sticking with that and not allowing the role that I've carried out separately, right? Unduly, right, influence how I'm gonna make this decision. Okay? Yeah. Is that kind of the advice you got? I'm curious.
Yes and no.
Yeah, I think if you get granular about it, I think you'll see that like the authorities of the planning commission are,
The
for
thing
the
is,
most part, separate and.
it would be rare,
Yeah.
and if it would have to come before here and go before planning and zoning, I then would have to make a decision whether I recuse myself here and take it there,
Mhm.
or do it here and then recuse myself in planning and zoning.
Mhm.
I have that option.
Okay. Yeah, you do. Yep.
Okay.
I think we covered most of the stuff on running hearings, so I hope that was some helpful suggestions. Let's go to the next slide. I think that's it. I failed to mention as I was going through them, yeah, I think we covered all those. The two handouts, for purposes of that openness requirement under the open meetings law, a meeting, right, for purposes of the openness requirement is a gathering, whether it's in person, by phone, or by electronic means, including email. And that's why my scenario involving Bruce and Niall and Tammy was an email scenario. So we need to recognize that electronic communications are subject to the same requirement. And I'm not saying that email isn't a good tool for certain things, but you do not want to use email for discussion of the commission's public business among 3 or more members. Why? Because it's not open, right? That discussion is not open to the public. So that one handout on open meetings discusses a little bit further the legal background of that. And email is a good tool for certain things like, you know, receiving your packet and checking on scheduling and availability. You can even use it to pose a question for discussion at a future meeting. You know, you could send Madison an email and say, hey, I'd like us to look at this issue at our next meeting. And you could copy all 4 of your fellow commissioners, and that wouldn't be a violation of the open meetings law. But the difference there, of course, is you're not having a discussion about the issue. You're just posing a question for later discussion. That makes sense? And the handout talks a little bit more about suggested do's and don'ts. Do recognize that the correspondence of appointed officials that relates to your job as an appointed official, right, is generally a matter of public record. So my risk management takeaway is wearing your commissioner hat, don't say in an email anything that you wouldn't want to say in a public meeting, right? Because anybody can go to the clerk's office and ask for those emails, and you have an obligation to provide them, right? So good way to just manage emails is to copy Madison on any email, and then they can help. If it's a informational item, they can chime in and say, hey, we got it, we'll take care of it, and we'll get the information out to all of you, right? Okay. And then the other handout is sort of summarizing the do's and don'ts about the quasi-judicial role, okay? So finally, my takeaways, if I can, well, certainly on behalf of SRSA, and if I can be so presumptuous on behalf of the town of Minturn, thank you. Thank you for stepping up, right, to be on the commission to champion historic preservation within your community. Wonderful things that we do for our communities in that regard, so thank you for that. More to what I am here for. Remember always that part of the job of the commissioner is to be a champion of great process, right? Always commit to good process, commit to embrace process irrespective of outcome, right? Remember that process is a product that you as the commission provide, right? And that we will build faith and trust in the commission and in the town by making sure we always commit to fair and defensible processes. And that if we, you know, always approach the job in terms of making the right decision by applying the appropriate criteria through a fair and defensible process, right? Where we're showing by our own words and conduct that we're good judges, then we're going to be in a great place. I think our risk will go way down. And as importantly, in fact, I think even more importantly, people in the community, particularly the ones whose own property, who are affected by your decisions, their faith and trust in what you do goes way up. And any risk around concerns about what you do on behalf of the community dissipates, right? So, with that, I'll take any final questions if you have any thoughts. Happy to do that. And if not, thanks very much for having me out. Come visit with you all. It's always nice to come up to Denver.
I enjoyed
Come out
your
of Denver.
presentations, they're very clear.
Oh, thank you so much. Appreciate it. I think I probably mentioned when I visited the planning commission, the only thing I fault myself for is I never built in enough time to stay and meet. And some sales tax dollars in Minto. So I'm gonna go back to Denver, but thanks for having me up.
Thank you
So
for
let me
coming.
just check with-
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for those online.
Thank you. Thank you,
Yes.
Sam.
Ken, Tracy.
Thank you, Sam.
All right, thanks very much, Sam.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Oh, sure, yeah. We're just gonna take a 5-minute recess. So, we'll have the meeting back in session and on to our, business items. This is the one business item, certificate of appropriateness for relocation of Myers Barn from, 25th Harrison Avenue to Little Beach Park. Madison, do you wanna?
First, Kelly and Ken need to officially recuse themselves.
I hereby officially recuse myself. And Woody is going to be presenting for us. And Kelly and I will be available if Woody's unable to answer any questions.
Okay. So this is a certificate of appropriateness, actually the second one ever that y'all have dealt with. So exciting stuff. And the first relocation. So this was submitted to relocate the Myers Barn at 25 Harrison Avenue to Little Beach Park. In accordance with the criteria that all relocation and alteration or certificate of appropriateness need to be reviewed under, it is staff's understanding that there is little use for the structure in its current location, whereas the Little Beach Park sub-area master plan specifically calls out a building of similar dimensions to be placed at the top of the amphitheater slash kind of like parking area, upper parking area. Based on the plan submitted, staff does believe that the structure can be dismantled, moved, and reassembled while not affecting the integrity of the components very much. There are plans to replace a couple of the logs that have rotted near the ground, so that is one aspect that will be updated, but hopefully not will not be visually dissimilar to the rest of the logs that are already there. There are no current plans to replace the Myers Barn with a new structure, as there is another existing structure on the site. I will say that the code, I do not believe that when the code was written, it necessarily contemplated when we allowed for relocating structures. I believe that we really only contemplated that being the sole structure on the lot, and so we didn't want people to move structures without having a replacement essentially planned for the lots, that we wouldn't have just empty lots sitting in the middle of town. So while that is technically a criteria, it is staff's opinion that because there is still an existing structure on the lot, there is not a need for a reuse plan for that portion of the lot needed at this time. Planning Commission will need to view the application for the construction of the structure at Little Beach Park. So that should be a part of any condition of approval that is issued tonight, should y'all vote to recommend or vote to approve the certificate of appropriateness. That's just part of the process. I wouldn't have anticipated them to have gone to planning commission first, just because it is a historic structure. And so this should be the start of the process. So I don't believe they've skipped anything or anything like that, as in the case of other applications that are sometimes processed where conditions of approval are only granted because they've skipped something in the application. This is just a process thing. So staff believes that the relocation of the Myers Barn is, while not this specific structure, one similar is contemplated in the Little Beach Park Sudbury Master Plan adopted by the town, and thus supportive of this relocation. The log cabin should not impose on the structures already in the area, but instead provide additional charm and should not diminish the integrity of the neighborhood. So that is staff's portion of the presentation.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Do we have a statement from the proponent?
Oh, I'll always talk, you know that. Woody Woodruff, 344 Eagle River Street. Here as the only guy of the triad that's doing this, that's not recused, which is good, which is good. You know, this town has a real history, and I think that everybody sees that, but we don't have a place for it. And when this barn came up for, you wanted to demolish it, we got together, particularly Ken, because he had a guy that had done it before, and thought, okay, let's move this. And the place we're moving it to, I think, makes great sense. Of course, that it fits right where the preliminary plan on the hillside has a building that becomes probably a concession stand or a meeting place above the stage. It all seemed to make sense. So we looked at moving the whole building down the middle of Main Street. I wanted that image, but it financially it makes more sense to, you know, I've been convinced that it makes more sense to disassemble it and reassemble it. But this is the beginning of a process that the town hasn't done and we haven't done. So we want to let you know we're making it up as we go, and we'll continue to communicate with the town as to, does this make sense for you guys too? We've gotten great cooperation from the town so far. And for example, you talked about the logs being replaced. The building now sits on a slope, a pretty relatively steep slope. And so one side of the building is lower than the other, and the logs are shorter here, and then they get longer as you go up the slope. So we will have to take it at the first level and then rebuild below that, which also those logs tend to be rotted because they're sitting on the ground. There does not appear to be any foundation under it. So I happen to have a friend that has a stack of old gray logs. So we should be able to make it work. But we'll find out as we go through the process that we can take these ideas and put them together to work. So let's rock and roll on it. Questions?
So Tracy, do you have any questions for Woody?
Sorry, I was looking for the mute button.
That's right.
No, not right now. Thank you. Just listening.
Lynn?
No, I think it's an extremely well-detailed application, or however you want to say it. I love the old picture of the Myers. I think that's just wonderful. We need to blow that up and put it in there somewhere. And I think it would make a great little concession stand. I like the way you itemized out what has to be done. Is the one concern that I've heard from people, which personally I knew is you can mitigate, is the hantavirus. people worrying about that.
I had a extensive conversation with a hantavirus guy.
Yeah.
And he'd go in there and vaporize the hantavirus. before
I know it can
he
be done
spends
because I
time.
had to look into it once.
One thing I learned that's very interesting, that mice that carry hantavirus are on the ground, and up in the rafters are the pack rats who don't carry it. So, I don't know, you find out all kinds of wonderful little tidbits of
Details.
information that you're gonna use the rest of your life.
But I like the way you itemized out the cost. I think that
Well,
was good.
We have to be honest, that's a guess, you know, I mean,
Right.
we're kind of inventing the thing as we go. But we have, I think, 3 different people that bring different talent to the different experience. Ken's found the guy who stacks logs, and Ken has had experience redoing historical properties in Texas and managing large operations like that. So he becomes our manager and dealing with the town and coming up with documentation and stuff. Kelly, of course, everybody knows Kelly is master woodworker, and he's worked with me for many years. And I have actually have experience restoring historical properties, both up here and in Denver. And so hopefully those experiences will come together and we can, support each other and get this thing done. The hard part's always raising money, but once we get the go-ahead, then we'll start that process, and hopefully we can get that. We've got good seed money, so we think we can probably get it moved with what we've got pledged, but we'll see. And if not, we'll just get more. We'll get, that's how these things go.
So I also, are you done with? I also feel like it's a great way to preserve an existing historic structure, and I think the location and the application of its new use is really appropriate for the community, and it's a place to get a lot of contact. And however, I do have a couple of concerns and questions around that. Is that so? In moving something that has historic significance, particularly to the Meyer family, moving it, you run the risk of losing that connection to location that provides some of that significance. And I'm wondering if there was any consideration of providing a plaque to explain its original location and whose property it was.
Yeah, we need the people that donate money, the people that work on it, the volunteers, everybody will have plenty of plaques. But that brings a comment up that I've been thinking about when we think about when this is done and what goes on beyond. That piece of property extends to the south quite a ways. And there are old shacks that the railroad built for their crews to stay in when they did their layovers here. The train would come 8 hours from the east, come through Tennessee, and they would stop and the crew would get out because they were only allowed to work so many hours. A new crew would get on and they'd head to Salt Lake. And then the train would come back and they'd swap again. And that's what really Minturn became, was a swap place. And right next door to us, our neighbors have 2 of the little cabinettes. They're very small, like little rooms that people stayed in. And those could potentially be obtained and moved up to start to build somewhat of a, I don't know if village is the right word, but it does give a continuity to the history that can attract, somebody's going through Minturn and wondering, well, what do you do in Minturn here? I heard this is an interesting place, and they come and there's a sign that says, Old Town or whatever it's called. Then people can come up there and see, and we can collect all the junk that people have in their basements and put it in those buildings. I've already started collecting the junk. So I think that there's a potential for this to really be an asset to the town and to bring people in and enjoy the story of Minturn, because it is an interesting story.
Well, and so Madison, my question is, would it be reasonable to have a condition of approval that includes a requirement of a plaque referencing the original owner and location of the building?
I believe that is certainly something that you can condition, yeah.
Well, it's already part of the plan, but if you want to,
It's not specifically in the proposal, so I
okay, we can add that.
Yeah.
The proposal is
It's-
like the project is a work in progress, and yes,
Sure.
we're happy to put that in there, absolutely.
and I'm sure you are. I just, after coming on the heels of this meeting that we just had, if it's not evidence that's presented at the meeting, then it's not, can't be considered. So that's,
So
I'm
the
just
answer is,
clarifying.
the answer is yes.
Sounds great. Okay. And then I have a question about the feasibility. So I've looked closely at that building, and the feasibility of dismantling something that is of such frail nature. I question whether that's feasible. I don't know personally, but I'm curious if the log guy has any concerns about how it's going to come apart and go back together with all the pieces in the same spot and retain its integrity.
He, I met with him, and he's done this like 8 or 9 times, I don't know.
With something this old.
He's done it over and over. He's got a system for numbering the logs as they come off. So, you know, we take the top off, we take the roof off, because that's gonna have to be reassembled or built. And then you start at the top and you number the logs and you pull them off and put them on the trailer. So the logs that are gonna be on top go on the trailer first, and the logs that are gonna go on the bottom go on the trailer last. And you drive the trailer up and then you lift them off
Right.
onto the pre-poured foundation with probably a couple of these newer
Mhm.
old logs to give a foundation to it, and then you set them on and you take them off the trailer and they stack up. And he's done this over and over. He has a numbering system, and he's offered to be here for all of that.
Okay.
That's the first part of the process, is to get it there. Then we have to move forward to prep it for what it's going to be used for.
Right.
And that is what we're calling phase 2. And for example, what we'll do is we'll pour the foundation, but we will not pour the slab yet. We'll just put the gravel in and get it to level. And then we will leave gaps in the foundation to bring in utilities underground, the water, the electric, and whatever else. I don't know if they'll need gas, but maybe, I don't know. But we'll leave opportunities along the foundation to bring those things in. So once they get water on that side of the river, and we have the go-ahead and the finances, then we can bring those utilities in, and then we'll pour the slab and have drains out of it and
Sure.
and do it that way. But we're not ready to, we gotta get it there first.
Right.
And we're not pretending that we're gonna do it all at once. The idea is get it there and then let's keep going. What's interesting is that that side of the barn, are you guys looking at the picture? The side that faces out towards the street,
The current street.
where it's sitting there.
Yep.
The barn has 2 openings in it.
Uh-huh.
One has glass in it, the other has that little bump out that they
Yep.
built.
I was noticing the drawings don't show those openings.
No, the photograph I'm talking about.
Yep, no, but
They're not in the drawings because that stuff's all gonna come out. But those were how they brought the horses in. They brought them in one door and then they came out the other.
Mhm.
And that's where the concessionaires can come in one door and out the other. I think
Sure.
that's kind of cool. In the, in the path of the horses. What else?
Robert, I have something I'd like to contribute if I could.
Sure.
I just wanted to mention to your question about the fragile nature of the logs. That was our top concern. So Jim Parker, who's done this, as Woody said, several times, 8 times to be exact, disassembled and reassembled cabins, old log cabins. He came out 2 summers in a row, this last summer and the summer before, and spent time with the building and with a hammer banging on the logs and doing his thing. And then we also did that with Kelly, and then had a couple contractors look at it. And when the outside is much more fragile looking than if actually when you go inside. And basically, nobody thought that it was too fragile to move at the end of the day. So that gave me some comfort, but it was definitely there's some risk that some of the logs will have to be replaced, and so we've planned for that in our as Woody mentioned. So I just thought I'd add that context for you.
I appreciate that. That's very helpful for clarifying my concern. Thanks.
I'd like to add to it too. Kelly Toon, 531 Main Street. I have restored my own house in Redcliffe, which is 1880 log structure. I didn't move it, but I ripped out all the floors, re-leveled them, re-chinked the logs, and replaced deteriorated sections of foundation and logs, and re-chinked the thing. And it was an interesting process. And I recently, just several weeks ago, tore down a shed in Redcliffe and stripped it of the material that was salvageable and down to the bare bones. And it was interesting to see, like, oh, you take this and this off, like, you know, how sturdy it is. Mm-hmm. One thing that the old timers did, even with the lack of good quality material sometimes, is they use gigantic nails. So already aware of that. Every once in a while, most of the material they use came from the mines or the Fleming Lumber Company. Mm-hmm. But a lot of it is actually held together pretty strong because of fasteners, even though they lack the engineering that we have today. But they hold together surprisingly well, and in the dry climate too, they hold together a lot longer than a structure normally would, I think, because of our dry climate. The Walkers, who has a house across the street that I property manage, 400 Main Street, he was, I believe, mayor of the town and worked in the mine back in the day, and the family still owns their house, but they also own a piece of property in Eastvale, and there was another mine on, I believe it was the Bighorn Trail, and they actually restored a log cabin that's used as warming hut, almost a tree line. And there was actually, I happened to randomly come across a show on Discovery Channel, I believe, or History Channel, and it was Log Homes Restored, and it was the Vale edition, and they actually did a whole documentary on restoring the cabin up there, and it's open to the public. Anyone that travels up there can spend the night in it. And I was watching the documentary. I'm like, oh wait, I recognize that living room. They did all the meetings in Minturn in the Walker House, 400 Main Street, just across the street from the gas station. And it just kind of came to me. It could be a cool thing to do a documentary, which we have someone that loves doing documentaries on board. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with Redstone, but in the center of Redstone, just past Carbondale, they have a small log cabin, and in it, it's their history museum. And they do have a video telling the whole history of Redstone running on a loop and on a little display in there, and then artifacts that people put together through the town, which is just kind of, once you mentioned it, it could be a cool thing
to incorporate that in there.
It's, you know, willing participants, but it's really cool just to go in there and you watch a little display on the history of it. But they do have artifacts and plaques, and I do see it as a possible place, since we lack a place to display artifacts and photos of our history. I think it would be a cool opportunity if we had a concert and it's open for concessions, that a good number of people, of our own people, would appreciate all the items if we could display them in there. Sure. And also be a concession stand, or storage when it's not in use and all that.
So actually, thanks for for those ideas. That you mentioned chinking on your own project, and that was another question I had. Was so currently that log cabin has a couple of remnant bits of chinking left on it on the exterior. You know, I don't know how intentional your goal is to leave it looking like it does now, or restoring it back to a more a previous time when it had full chinking. I presume it wants to be weather tight for the concession stand. Is there a plan around the chinking, doing it just on the interior, or a particular type of chinking, or?
I don't think we've talked about it, but if it's concessions, you do want to keep the critters out.
Yep.
Probably we haven't thought about winter
we
too much as of now, but it could be a possibility down the road. But currently, we have summertime concerts, and
Right.
I think there's been one wintertime event that I know of at the amphitheater. It was snow skeet.
Well, I guess my point,
thing, but
my
Yeah.
point is simply that if I presume at some point chinking will come into play, and I
Yes.
presume you guys are going to try and do the most appropriate thing, but I wonder if, as our role as historic preservation, should we have that reviewed at the time that you go through? Because there are a lot of different types of chinking out there, and some of it's very
well, historically, they use up here. I do have knowledge of.
sure.
They use almost anything they had. Clothing. They use straw, concrete. They literally just and a lot of it was just strips of wood that they would fill. But in between that, it was just stuffed with anything they had. The concrete doesn't do well over time because it just cracks out because it doesn't have any steel in it. I found, which has held up great, is I used the spray foam that you use to seal modern houses, and it grips. Once the logs are cleaned, it grips onto it, and then you use the log jam, which stretches. It's like a big cock, but it's kind of built to it, and it does look similar to the old stuff, but just much cleaner, and it is a newer product. So we'd have to go over that. But
And I guess
technically it's mainly wood chunks just thrown in the cracks.
And I guess that gets to my point is that if it's going to be historic building, using spray foam is probably not appropriate. But it's
No,
it's a
no.
great product. I agree.
Well,
with you.
what I like to do in some of the projects I've done is, which is done, I got the idea from a lot of the traditional adobes in the Southwest.
Yeah.
Was I do a truth area or a truth window, and I show the building, what was behind the bones and how it was originally created. I did that at Helen's house a little bit, and then the rest of the building is updated to, better techniques. So, but it does show off how they used to do it, which I always like to show that off
Sure.
in my own projects.
And which I think is very laudable and a great approach. But again, for historic preservation purposes, I'm not sure that would meet. Like, I think the exterior of the building needs to retain its appearance.
Can I answer
Sure,
that?
sure.
I think the answer you want from what you just went through is that we will run whatever we're gonna choose to do to seal the barn up. We'll run it past you guys and make sure that it's acceptable. It needs to be not straw and not clothes and stuff. And there is, in the logging business, building log cabins, there are lots of modern chinks that can look just like the old stuff. But to your issue of making sure that if it's not absolutely historical, it looks and just like historical, certainly on the outside. On the inside, we may,
You can do anything on the inside.
on the inside, we may seal it up. We might, insulate it a little
Sure.
and put wood siding or some kind of siding on the inside so that it's really sealed.
Right.
But I think we want, just as you do, for it to appear as close to the original as we can.
So I have a question, Madison. So
Um,
this is a request to move it.
Yes.
Right.
If later there's a modification like chinking
Can I-
exterior, then that would be another certificate of
Certificate.
approval because it's modifying the appearance of the exterior.
That's correct. So it would have to come back before you regardless because you would be affecting the exterior of a historic
So
structure.
there's no need for any further conditional approval because that's something which would come up anyway.
Yeah,
Correct.
because we
Yeah.
don't know right now.
Sure, I totally
Like I
understand.
say, we're making it up.
So currently there's, you know, little triangular pieces of wood in the cracks and I see it as keeping those and putting them back in. So like the chinking that you do put is more seen on the inside. And, like the cabin that I restored for myself, I took wire brush and got all the dirt off the logs, which you kind of have to do. So stuff sticks to them, but also I varnished all the logs on the inside, which had the original ads map marks on them and some carvings of initials on them, and I preserved all of that so you could still see that. It was very time consuming and probably the dirtiest thing I've ever done in my life. But once you put,
That you talk
but
about.
this old finish, you know, the old woods, you know, you put a varnish on it, like an oil-based varnish, and it makes it beautiful. Just
Sure.
the logs can just shine if you want them to, or you leave it, you know, dirty and dingy, kind of in its current state.
Well,
but
Somewhere in between. I mean,
Right.
I've seen the stuff, I've seen pictures of what he did.
Yeah.
And it does take it down to the wood, which makes it look not like it does today. It makes it look like
when it was built,
when it was built, and also will make the added logs blend in better. So, but once again, before we did it, we'd come talk to you guys and make sure that it fits the criteria of your committee.
Great.
Since, you know, 2/3 of our leadership is in your committee, I think we'll do that.
But it would be interesting, which I didn't think about till tonight, to involve the Walkers, and Tom Sullivan has the addresses of them, and they do stay at the Walker House every year. They come back out, but they do have extensive knowledge on fixing up their cabin up in Vail, and it was a fascinating show if you can Google it. But they did spend a whole summer
We
restoring
could
it.
potentially get a copy of it and have a little video screen in there.
And they have a wonderful plaque inside that tells the whole story of the family and the history of the site, and it's fascinating to go visit. And they just have a gravel floor, and they just have, you know, old utensils, and you could spend the night in it if you want.
Sure.
Robert, if I could just add another piece of context, I forgot to give my address to Ken Halliday, 811 May. But there's a phase 1 to this project, which is to disassemble it and then reassemble it on a new foundation over there without any chinking, exactly as you see it. And then there's a phase 2, which would be a separate project, which is the finish out of the interior, et cetera. And that's going to require us coming back for all kinds of different steps, both on what's the plan for chinking, what's the plan for the floor, what's the plan for the use. The town staff will be involved in that, or I don't know who, P&Z, whatever. And so we'll go through all the appropriate approvals. So this is just to get us moved over there and reassembled.
Phase 1.
Great.
And so that budget you saw is just for this phase 1.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Uh-huh.
I had only one other question, concern. The drawings that were provided, I presume are for the engineering purpose of the foundation, because they're
Not to
the
scale.
roof's not accurate to the
Right.
original roof. I presume you're going to keep the
Just
original.
from engineering.
Yeah, so the original roof shape will remain, and this also only shows one opening where, as you're pointing out, there are two openings. Both openings would remain.
There would be some discussion on what to fill into those holes and to have a new door that wouldn't be original, because at one point a shed got added to it
Right.
after it was a horse barn, so that's not original from what the Myers.
Right.
I did know the Myers, and as far as I know, they're both still alive, but in Arizona. But that whole property, the front house in the very front, kitty corner from the gas station, was the main house from the 1800s. And it was just a whole barn and pasture for the horses. And I got a wealth of information from Russ when he moved, Mr. Myers, when he moved out here as a small kid, and amazingly clear in his thoughts. And I've over the years got to know a lot of information about the town through him, and to me it would be a huge tribute to get this project done, because his family was so important in this town.
I think it's a great project. I'm really glad you guys are taking it on. Tracy, Tracy, do you have
Robert, just to clarify too, that drawing that we did, the engineering drawing, was a quick and dirty that was done for free for us, just so we could get some ballpark on the foundation. That won't be what we present to planning and zoning, or what we present for the building permit. That's yet to be done up, so it'll be a totally different document.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Tracy, do you have anything else to add?
Yeah, and Ken, maybe you can help me understand this. So when it moves over and we have the foundation, is that site already designated where the concrete will be poured?
As part of the planning and zoning process, we've been told that we would actually go out there and set it up, where we think it should be according to the master plan. And we'll probably have to have the town out there helping us, locate it, the staff or somebody. But the town has indicated a willingness to have the structure on town property, and that is town property. So we'll just have to work out the details of the angle and exactly where. Because if you look at that envisionment of the master plan for Little Beach, some of that doesn't exist, like the pathway down. So where we locate it's going to be a little bit of a trick that we'll have to work out with the town to make sure we get in the right spot.
I see. So, well, thank you for clarifying that has not been.
That'll be part of our next step with planning and zoning.
My concern, and I did, in an ethical way, I heard someone mention that they were a bit fearful that there was going to be some trees, like very large trees that might have to come down for this.
No, it's in a parking. It's right at the top of the.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Any trees
That's all
affected.
reassuring, and I wasn't able to answer that. I just listened. So, okay.
I can answer that for you.
I appreciate it.
I can answer that because not our part of the plan, because where we're putting it, there is no trees. But for the expansion of the stage and the seating area, it does appear that some trees will be taken out. But that's up to the town, that's not any part of our deal.
Tracy, if you look at in that packet that came to you, there was a slide in there that has the master plan. It's just an excerpt from the master plan, and you can see on there how they envision expanding the stage. That's not our work product. That's from the planning process the town went through. But in there, you'll see when they expand the stage, it looks like that line of trees does go away, but I don't know if that's correct or not.
Right.
It's not relevant to this application, so.
No, it's not.
Right, not relevant. Move on.
No.
Lynn, do you have any other questions, concerns?
No, I think as far as tonight is, what we're approving is whether or not this barn can be moved and go out to Little Beach Park area.
Mm-hmm.
And I do not have any further questions.
Okay, would anybody like to make a motion?
I need public comment to be open first.
Sorry?
Public comment to be open first.
Is there anyone for public comment?
No,
Pardon?
online.
No, not online? Thank you, Madison, for reminding me. And then we'll close public comment. And
I'd like to make a motion to recommend approval to Town Council of the historic landmark nomination applications for the Myers Barn located at 25 Harrison Avenue.
If I may make a point of, y'all are the deciding vote on this. This will just go to council on consent, but council will not talk about this unless they call it up. So it's not a recommendation, it's a decision.
Okay.
Oh, you're looking at the staff report for the landmark designation, not the staff report for the certificate of appropriateness.
Shall I try again? Certificate of appropriateness application.
Madison, I have a question.
No, it's not.
This does get approved here, but then it does go on the consent agenda
Yes.
the next meeting?
Yes,
Or, well,
but they're
Tomorrow
not,
night, but the next one after that?
the next one after that,
Okay.
but they're not forwarding a recommendation because that would then imply that council is making the deciding vote. They are making the decision and that decision is being put on consent agenda for council to ratify.
Okay, great. Thank you.
I'm getting there.
Alright.
Ta-da. That's what I just read. Page 45. I didn't see.
Page 36 is where the staff report starts.
Ah,
Still have one of these.
However, I do not have a recommended motion in there, so y'all can just make a.
So it's page 38,
Page
so
38 does.
a motion to grant a certificate.
Okay, I did.
I make a motion to grant a certificate of appropriateness for the Myers Barn located at 25 Harrison Avenue to be located to Little Beach Park.
And I believe at the beginning we discussed there's a necessary condition of approval from the planning commission.
Mhm.
So we would add that to this. A condition of approval is that it is approved by the planning commission.
That's right.
And then I'd also like to add the condition that a plaque indicating the original location and historic nature of the building be included.
Okay.
Absolutely.
I'll second that motion.
So a roll call vote to everyone in favor?
Tracy, I. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Tracy.
Tracy, I.
Lynn, aye.
Robert, aye.
Okay. Y'all have your certificate of appropriateness.
Thank you,
Thanks, guys.
Commission.
I'm mostly just really interested. It sounds like a great project, so I'm really pleased.
Is that a volunteer?
Fingers
can help
crossed.
Do I hear a
I
volunteer?
will likely be
Oh, and
able
we'll
to-
come talk to you about donations. You stepped in it
And a plaque.
and a plaque, your name on a plaque. You can have your own.
I don't need a plaque. The historic plaque is all I care about.
Yeah, but we need help.
We're definitely going to have plenty of historic plaques.
Yep.
That's
Okay,
yeah.
so let's see. I think that closes that subject. Thank you for your contribution, everybody. And let's see.
Okay, so so I'm officially rejoining the meeting.
Yes, you are. As is.
Okay, I've just moved in over to the other side of the table now.
It's less
I
visually
like it.
impactful when you're doing it from Zoom.
I know, that's why I said I need to do it metaphysically. Whoosh.
Do you mind if you get up and then sit down again?
Sure, yeah, whatever it takes.
Woody, you're welcome to stay if you'd like to.
What's next?
Next is our discussion items on flexibility.
You don't.
You do
I
not
got
have.
chased out of here the first time.
It's a public meeting, so you're welcome to stay if you'd like,
No,
but there's no requirement.
Yes, there is no requirement.
I know everybody here and
We-
I think you guys will do a great
So
job.
thank you. We appreciate your input.
I'll tell them what happens at the bar afterwards.
Hey, thank you, Woody.
What
Thanks.
bars?
Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Good
Have a
night,
good
Woody.
night, Woody.
Good night.
Okay, so the next item is discussion, direction items regarding flexibility.
Yes. So this is a continuation of the discussion at last meeting. Robert and Ken were not here. And so I I feel like I made it very clear at the last meeting's discussion that since 2 of the 5 members weren't there, last meeting's was really just to kind of kick off the discussion. However, by no means had we vetted anything through yet or anything like that. We were just throwing out ideas. One of those ideas was presented by Lynn to incorporate something similar to Buena Vista Section 19-9. And I do apologize, the original version of this memo I somehow copied the section below and didn't catch that until Lynn called me about it on Monday. And so that has now been corrected. That should be correct in your packet that it is 19-9, but originally it was 19-10 that was copied. So I do apologize about that. But essentially section 19-9,
Do you mind putting it on the, on the board
sure,
for
just
us?
1 second.
Thank you, Madison. I mean, I know it's in the packet, which I'm looking up right now on my phone, but might be easier.
Okay, there we go. So
Thank you.
Of course. So this is essentially enabling a revocation of designation process, which is not something that we currently have in our town code, which would allow people to essentially step out or remove themselves from the historic register should something happen to their property that is unavoidable to them, such as fire, a boulder runs through their house, to name a non-specific example that's definitely happened in this town before. Just things that are outside of the property owner's control. And so in order to lift restrictions on them, they would otherwise have to abide by in order to essentially rebuild their historic structure. This would provide a process for which they can remove themselves from the historic register and therefore only be subject to the same regulations that the rest of town is. So that is the option that was thrown out or suggested at the last meeting. And so that is obviously what was in the memo in front of y'all, but I am under no, I definitely do not, I believe that there are probably other items out there that should or could be discussed in order to incentivize the historic preservation process and therefore bring something to council helping people who have historic properties.
So in the interest of kind of organizing this subject, I think we have a very specific suggestion in front of us.
Mm-hmm.
May I say something?
Sure.
The reason I brought this to us is because it had been expressed by
Lynn, will you
council.
turn your microphone back on?
I'm sorry. The reason I brought this in was because at one time it had been expressed at a council meeting by one of the council members that this was something they had a consideration in trying to find something out about, well, what if somebody gets in it and something happens? I just happened to have Buena Vista's historical memo at home because I had an historical home in Buena Vista, and I found this in there, and so that's why I brought it in for us to look at.
So in where it says no fault of the owner, if it's destroyed, I'm guessing that would make it not okay if arson was set to a structure by the owner to get rid of the structure.
I would say they'd be at fault.
Yes,
I think they'll be prosecuted if they.
There's
No.
a potential. It's like, well, it burned down, and
there's bigger issues, I feel, if people are having to resort to arson.
But it does mean that they can bring it to apply for a revocation. So it's not a guaranteed thing. Imagine if there's a criminal act involved, they probably would not be granted.
Right, and we do currently within our code, and I apologize, Ken, I'm going to have to stop sharing so that I can look at the code.
That's okay. I got it now.
Within our code, chapter 19, article 13, I believe. That essentially, that article, if somebody goes through and demolishes, constructs without a permit, essentially tries to bypass the historic preservation process without, bypassing implies without getting the appropriate permits, then the town does have the ability to put liens on the property, to essentially invoke different fines in order for that property to be restored to its historic nature. So I'm by no means suggesting that we substitute the Buena Vista section for this section. I do believe that this section should still live here, so that if something is done unlawfully, such as arson, then the town still has the ability to essentially make them reconstruct the building in a historic fashion.
And I guess there's another question: what happens partially destroyed, and how much?
And I think that's where it comes to, they can come and ask for forgiveness from the code, but if maybe the determination is that, well, there's enough left to restore it, then.
Is that a gray area that's left up to us, I guess?
Well, that is certainly up. I mean, we do not have to adopt Buena Vista's
Yeah, I'm just
code.
throwing it out there.
Yeah.
Right. So if y'all would
Kind of
like
like
to say,
remodeling half the structure.
Right.
We deemed 50% of the front facade. So anyways,
And this is just what they had. That doesn't mean that we can't use this as a foundation and make it work for us.
And I think it does say, the commission shall recommend, if it determines that without the demolished structure, the structure size no longer meets the purpose or criteria. So if there's enough of it remaining that it meets the criteria, then that's up for us to determine.
Yeah, I think that language covers that personally.
Yeah, I think so.
It gives us, it gives them, I think it puts the decision with the commission, which I think is where it should be in that situation.
And then ultimately it goes to the town council. They say
Right,
our
sure.
Is
Right.
representing the board trustees and the council. Well, I appreciate you bringing it, this, Lynn, and I'd like to make a motion that staff draw an ordinance that follows this to bring to us as that will fit into our code in the appropriate place.
So this is discussion direction, so I don't take motions,
Okay.
because it's not a public hearing for anything. However, I do take direction from 3 of y'all. So as long as I have 3 thumbs up to do that,
So
I
we
can
have
certainly
a
do that.
thumbs up to bring this
Thumbs-
forward.
yes,
to-
Yes, thumbs up.
Great. I think that's a nice addition. So then, and then to switch this, so we're on the subject of flexibility, are there any other proposals among our members who feel like there's something which we would like the town council to consider as a change in the code to promote historic preservation?
Yeah, I'd like to go back to a discussion we had a couple of meetings ago around setbacks and parking as it relates to historic structures. And, we've all had some time to think a little bit since that meeting. And I just want to open it back up, whether or not we would give setback relief for historic structures, for historically designated structures, and maybe even some parking relief. And I know there was some strong feelings around the table, and I think we should, have that discussion and see where this goes.
Is there a specific language you'd like to propose?
Well, I'm trying to remember, Madison, can you help us recall on the setbacks, a couple of the ideas that we were, obviously subject to fire and requirements, et cetera. I think we were talking about side setbacks, could be as little as 2 feet, as I recall. And then front and back setbacks, rather than being 20 feet, would be 10 feet or something like that.
Right.
You guys have a lot more experience with the town, particularly Lynn does. but all you guys have more experience than I do on this. But I just think I think it's a discussion we ought to have. Madison, what were you going to say?
I believe that it was 3 feet on the side just because of fire
Fire or something.
separation
Yeah, that's right.
requires 6 feet between structures. And so 3
Okay.
feet on either side of the setback or on either side of the property line provides that fire separation structure. And I believe also when we last discussed this, there was a caveat added stating that, you know, the 3 feet would only be granted as long as 6 feet fire separation was maintained. So if, you know, your neighbor's structure sat on the property line, you couldn't take advantage
Got it.
of,
Yep.
of that.
I remember
so
that.
We're not
Yep.
risking, you know, safety.
Although, depending on the construction proposed, it just would require a higher level of fire resistance in that exterior assembly.
Well,
So
the fire
it's-
department still has to be able to get back there. So, or through the structures.
Yeah, I think it's
They
access.
told us 6 feet.
I see, so it's an access issue.
It's an access issue as well,
Yeah.
yeah.
So, and then what about rear setback, was there?
I believe it was either 5 or 10 feet off the front and rear, as long as there was no encroachment into any riparian area. So it is not the town's position to give exemptions without a variance request to allow encroachments within the 30-foot live stream setback.
Sure.
But anywhere else in town that was, you know, that doesn't deal with the live stream setback, I believe it was proposed 5 to 10 feet, depending on how large, because the setback varies across town.
Mhm.
In some places, the front setback is 10 feet and the rear setback is 20. Sometimes it's flip-flopped. So not allowing people to build up to their property line, but allowing them to build within 5 feet or something like that.
Mhm. Well, I think, I mean, my opinion is I think it would be beneficial to promote historic preservation to allow a reduced setback. And I think the 3 feet sounds like the minimum. I mean, if it's already a 5-foot setback on the side in that 100 block, 3-foot setback would give room for someone to do a overarching structure that could span over an existing building. So I think that would be beneficial to allow further development. And then the front and rear, I mean, it's already 5 feet in the 100 block. And the question is, would we allow that in residential parts of the town? I'm guessing that would really only come into play if someone were moving a historic structure forward to make more room at the back.
Right.
Because you wouldn't build something new in front of the historic structure, because that would
Correct.
interfere. So, I mean, we could even say, you know, a 5-foot setback for a relocated structure in the front. And then, I mean, I'm for giving as much benefit as we can to a historic preservation. So I'd say 5 in the back, but if other people think 10 is more appropriate.
And I think before Lynn was mentioning all the work that went into the 100 block, but we do have possible buildings elsewhere
Neighborhoods, yes.
in
And
the
that's
rest of
where I
town.
see that becoming an issue
A reduced setback becoming an issue.
in neighborhoods and in residential neighborhoods. I think in downtown, I have no problem with the side setbacks. I think if that historical property chose to do an addition to the back of the building that is there, which is a possibility on some of those, that depends on whether that building becomes residential. I still think we need parking for that residential unit. That would be added on, or 2, depending on what it is.
So let's stay on one subject and then the next. Right now we're talking
Yeah.
about setbacks. Parking, I think, is
Right.
another discussion.
But I think that those setbacks on the back then play into the parking.
If parking is required.
Correct. So that.
But they might be able to put parking and have a building pushed back closer.
As long as they're still
Correct.
providing.
As long as they
Correct.
provide the parking.
What I'm saying, it has to be considered.
Well-
If you're building and you're reducing the back parking, and that building goes up because of residents, then it has to be considered as to where the parking is for that residence.
So if the parking could be underneath a second story, and that would mean allowing the setback to be, you know, could only go all the way to
Right.
5 feet. So,
I,
I guess-
but
I guess
then
what
again, that depends, according to the community plan, what do they call that back street, a Woonerf?
Woonerf.
Woonerf is what the people, through the whole community plan and all the open houses we had, of people coming in here and all the time we spent on that, they were seeing that setback also allowing for a car to go down and people to walk back there. It wasn't bringing it right up to the edge, which would stop that from happening.
Actually, though, if you look at a Woonerf description, it's a narrow street, slows traffic down to a pedestrian
Yep.
level. And
Yep.
if you have a wide street, then people are gonna drive at full speed, and then
Yep.
it's no longer safe.
I think they were just
So
saying,
a Woonerf, alley tends to be very narrow. And all the descriptions, all the diagrams of it are for very narrow streets to provide that Woonerf experience.
well, then I think we need to take a second look at what is in our design review for that street, because that's the street it would probably affect most, that and Eagle, correct?
If
Yeah.
we're specifically talking about the
If
downtown.
we're talking about the rear
If we're
setbacks,
talking about the downtown. And the problem that I see then is, how is this in the future taken out of the downtown into the residential areas, and do we have a plan for that, which we do not?
Well, we also have commercial that is not in the 100 block,
Correct.
scattered and little
So I guess what
bits
I'm
through
saying, I
town,
think this is
so
something
that
that-
could apply to them.
I think this is if you're talking about just in the downtown area, it's one thing. If you're talking about it, taking it through town, I think it leads to much further discussion.
so,
Does that make sense?
Mhm.
And that discussion then,
Is it downtown versus the rest of the town, or is it commercial versus residential?
well, that's something that
So I-
hasn't been discussed in our community plan.
and
It was just.
But yeah, but putting the community plan aside, just for the sake of this discussion, and just looking at historic buildings, are we saying that that we might consider changing setbacks in the downtown area, but not the rest of the town? Or are we saying we would maybe consider it for commercial, but not for residential? I'm trying to understand what you were saying.
I think that's what I'm trying to say.
Which one? Which one?
I think, it's gonna get hard when you get into a mixed-use block. And if that mixed-use block has commercial and a building that might be nominated. How does that
Okay.
work? Because personally, I do not agree that residential homes should be moved to within 5 feet of setback unless it were perhaps a new area. In other words, like Battle Mountain or
Well, we're
Midtown.
talking about historic buildings, so
I'm
that
talking
wouldn't
about
apply.
historic, so how does that affect the other residents for the future? That would be my worry, and that is not covered in our community plan. And that community plan took a lot of work, so what I'm saying is, I'm not saying it won't happen, but I think we need to do further thought of it when we take it out of the downtown 100 block and put it into a residential neighborhood.
And I would like to point out that there is we do not have a historic district. We just have historic structures
Correct.
Right.
throughout town. So if the direction that this conversation eventually takes says we're going to separate out the 100 block from the rest of town, we don't really have a mechanism for that in chapter 19. That there is we wouldn't be able to say, okay, in this historic district, these rules apply.
And I think I heard the town council or a couple of town council members express concern that if you're treating historic structures differently in the 100 block versus elsewhere in town, it's not fair to someone who wants to develop a historic structure
Right.
elsewhere.
Yeah, I agree.
It would need
I
to
agree with
be
that.
consistent. And I think the other thing I'd like to point out is that I don't think there are that, like, how many structures in town are going to actually get nominated and supported?
Not many, probably.
We've had it for 2 years and we're just now having 5.
Right.
So.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's gonna mean a massive change throughout town, although what I think, when what your concern is, if I may paraphrase, is that if I live next to a historic structure, then suddenly someone can build a huge thing that encroaches on my adjacency to it.
It can, yes, I think in a commercial area, it's one thing. But in a neighborhood, if you take, a lot of the older homes were built further back.
Mhm.
Okay, so if you take that and say, well, your house right now is sitting 15 feet back, but we want you to take it up 5 feet, what does that do to the neighbors? And I know a lot of people don't feel that's the issue, but I think that's a consideration you have to make.
It's concern for the neighbors of the
Correct.
property that's being.
It's like us
Adjacent to
saying,
it.
it's
Yeah.
like when you say your roof snow, if it's too close, is gonna slide, you go to 3 feet instead of 5 feet. Where's that snow gonna go? It's like worrying about
Well,
how do you
well,
affect your neighbor's slide or sunshine, and does that affect their ability to keep ice off of their property? It's a continuous process, and I think that's something that needs to be further discussed.
And in the old days, most of the old houses were small because they didn't have much money, and they had lots of yard, lots of parking, lots of sunshine. It's usually when a newer house is built that maxes out everything is when that affects the neighbors. Most of the people love moving into an older house because they get the sun and they don't have
They
this
have the views.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a suggestion. I wonder if we could, this is just a direction item. I wonder if we could ask staff to draft something up that we could look at, because it might be clarifying for us to see something in writing based on this conversation, and give us some options. And then we could discuss it again at our next meeting.
So current
Kind
residential.
of like what we were going to do on the prior issue.
So current residential setbacks, if I'm correct, are 5-foot side yard.
And they vary throughout town depending on which
Right.
residential zone district you're in, but it's typically either 10 to 20 feet on the front. And then, here, let me
10
just look it
in
up.
the back.
And it's easy enough to look up. Let me just look
See,
it
then
up.
staff can go through that gyration of, figuring out, okay, how can we translate this discussion?
What,
Okay, so Old Town Residential, 10-foot front, 10-foot rear, 5-foot side. South Town Residential, 20-foot front, 10-foot rear, 5-foot side. Martine Creek, which are those really large lots on the north side of Highway 24, about the 700 block. 40-foot front, 20-foot rear, 20-foot side. Cross Creek Residential is 20-foot front, 10-foot rear, 10-foot side. And Game Creek is 20-foot, which is Taylor Street. I apologize, I should have been giving more specifics. Okay, so Old Town is 200 block to 700 block. South Town is 800 block to the about 1200 block. Cross Creek is 1200 block south. And then Game Creek, as I said, is Taylor. They're 20-foot front, 10-foot rear, and 5-foot side. So those are all the different residential zone districts that we have in town. So they're all kind of a mix.
So just riffing off the side setback of going from 5 to 3, that's a 40% reduction in the setback.
And the major problem you'll have there, you're not gonna have it in your commercial areas so much because those buildings are closer. But I can tell you this, in my neighborhood, if you took it down to 3 feet on either side, there'd be major problems because the driveways are at the back of the house, and that's not gonna work. So that's what I'm saying, there's too many, when you get into.
But if someone has a driveway through to a garage at the back, they're going to retain their driveway, they're not going to encroach on that.
Correct.
But I mean, those are things that.
But that doesn't affect if the other lot comes closer to that driveway, that doesn't affect that driveway because the code already requires you to not shed snow on your neighbor's lot. So if someone builds a structure, they would have to retain the snow on the roof.
But I can tell you what Okay. I'm trying to
I
say
think
this
that-
calmly.
I don't know what it is, but I think there could be some other creative things.
That we could do.
Yeah, I personally haven't found them out besides what we've already done, but to me, it's like homework and talking to people that have gone through the process of building with an old house or remodeling and finding out what went wrong, what could have made things easier for them. Obviously everyone wants to make money, but we could just magically say your house is worth twice as much if it's old.
Not magic.
You say your house is historic, we've taken half the value out of the house.
But in creating a really cool neighborhood that has old houses, your value goes up because it's more desirable to be in those neighborhoods.
Right. So it's interesting, 20 years ago, I was looking at property in Telluride, and we looked at this house that was only 1,000 square feet. It was one of those old Victorians, beautiful old thing, and it was $750,000. And I was like,
Should have bought it.
You should have bought 3 of them.
Wish I had. I didn't have half that to buy a house.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm in no position to buy one, but I was said to the realtor, I'm like, what in the world? Like, that's 3 times more expensive than anything else we've seen. He said, well, you're buying the lot. I said, well, but it's a historic building. What can I do with that? And he said, well, what everyone's been doing is they build out the rear of the lot to within 5 feet of the property line on all 3 sides. They go down and build a whole story underground, and they add 3,000 square feet to this 750 square foot front of the building.
Keep the front.
And so the character of the street is maintained. Every building, they're all these old buildings, and then meanwhile people are building a 4,000 square foot home. I'm like, well, how much would that cost to build? He said, but once you do that, it's worth $4 million. The money to play with. But so this is the sort of thing, like if you allow people to realize a higher use for the lot in spite of the historic building, you're going to promote historic preservation. And if our role as a committee is to promote historic preservation, I think it's incumbent upon us to find ways to make it cost effective for someone to have a historic designation. And if we don't give them something, and the advantage of setbacks is that it's giving them a more buildable area to work with.
But it does affect neighbors.
Well, and then take a street like Boulder and Pine. You've got front and side setbacks. If you took this to 5 feet and that to 5 feet and that to, we're talking about mixed use. So in mixed use, behind some of the buildings are on Main Street, and then you've got Boulder behind there. How does it affect the other side of the street? I guess what I'm saying is, and I'm going to go back to this, I think it needs to be further discussed before anything can really be done.
And the way it can be further discussed is if we provide a proposal to the town council to consider. Or we ask staff to come up with,
Or would it be better, and this is going to be my final question that I was thinking of, to have a combined meeting between planning and zoning, who works with that kind of thing, and the historical?
The only reason, or the only way that planning and zoning would be involved in this is if the proposed code change involves chapter 16. If it involves chapter 19, planning and zoning has no bearing on discussion.
And
May
we
I-
recently
may I-
just made some
may I make
changes
a
that
comment?
were at requests.
just that can.
But I think we
Yep.
can still always try to do some research, and which I'm guilty of recently not doing that. But we did just make some changes with combined effort of all 3 councils, I think. And we did come up with several.
And could not those things be done through a variance if necessary? I know that's harder,
Yes.
but it is, it's still an option that's out there. And why I'm thinking that is, say that a house downtown in the commercial area were to want to put something onto the back, the front had to remain the same because it was historical. Could that back rear adjustment be done through a variance
Okay.
without having to go through changing the whole code and trying to get into the residential.
Potentially, but it could
I think-
also be denied out of hand. Ken, you have a question?
Yeah, I think the problem with the variance, though, you can't say on day one, this is a benefit of being
Correct.
historic,
That's
because
what he
it's,
just said.
so you lose that. But, you know, when thinking about, Lynn, your point about the front, I'm persuaded by that. And I'm thinking maybe a way to continue the discussion is to ask staff to draft something around side setbacks and rear setbacks, and let us continue this discussion at our next meeting, and see what they come back with in terms of options. Another thing that occurred to me is, and I don't know if this makes any sense, Madison, but would we want to look at lot utilization? Because I am persuaded by the comment that Robert made that the more that you allow historically designated buildings to utilize the lot space, then that will encourage historic designation. And so that's the other thing that triggered is there anything around lot utilization we should ask staff to also draft up? And I think, to me, what we should do is, we're not making a decision on any of these things, but we're just asking staff to come back to us so that we can see something in writing and we can further discuss it and think about it in between meetings
And Ken,
until
when you
we
say-
feel comfortable enough to make a recommendation.
A clarification that when you say lot utilization, do you mean building coverage and impervious surface coverage?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I appreciate your point that maybe we're not at a stage to approve anything or make any.
No,
Just brainstorming.
formal
no,
recognition.
but I think we are at a place where we could ask staff to take from this discussion and to come back to us at our next meeting with some things that we can, you know, further consider and discuss.
And I wonder too, if it sounds like the concern is in residential zones, if maybe we start out with a consideration in commercial or mixed use, maybe just commercial, but maybe both mixed use. And then we can, while that disadvantages a historic structure in the residential neighborhoods, maybe it's a starting point.
Madison,
Yeah.
can I ask one more, or Ken, maybe you can answer, or just bring it up. The other part is there are buildings in this town that are built off to one side of the lot. How would
Yeah.
this address side setbacks for those people?
Existing buildings.
Well,
are
I don't,
Existing.
Grandfathered in.
non-conforming, and they could remain as they are.
But if you're saying you're giving them the incentive to build to the side, does that mean they could go further onto one side even though it remained?
Not with the.
no.
The
No,
new
I don't.
portion.
Okay, that's what I'm saying.
That's why I think it would be good to get a draft in front of us, because I think it'll help refine our thinking, and we'll see it and we'll go, no, you know, that's a problem. It's just the way my brain works. I'd also, I would like to ask if there's support for that, and then maybe we could talk about some other stuff beyond just setbacks tonight while we still have time.
Yeah, I would be happy to support that.
Yeah, I
Okay,
agree.
and I think we need 3 at least.
I would agree, yeah.
I'm good with
Okay,
that.
so-
And thank you. Good idea.
We're unanimous, thumbs up.
Okay.
Okay, so Madison, you got that one. The other one is
And
parking,
just-
and I don't
sorry,
know.
Just,
Oops,
Ken, just really
excuse me.
quick to clarify, so setbacks as well as lot coverage.
As well as lot coverage for commercial and mixed use properties, as well as the Buena Vista revocation of designation. That is what I'm drafting an ordinance
Yeah.
for.
So I think the revocation, yeah, I guess, yeah, we need to. look
Yes.
at
And the ordinance are just coming back with the ideas.
Well,
Proposals
everybody's
or.
been saying draft something, so I've been assuming.
I don't think it should be an ordinance at this point. I think it should be some clarification about what we're talking about, if that's possible.
Well, I think it would be best if it was what I think is you draft it as an ordinance so that we can see what it would look like, and then we can discuss from that. But it's definitely not coming back for, like, you know, a stamp approval. The only one that we're at that point is the revocation, I think we'll look at that language and hopefully be there. I mean, that's my 2 cents worth.
I'm in agreement with that.
Yeah, I mean, but we're not looking for something that we're going to necessarily approve. It's just going to be a discussion item.
I think when the thing about having it written as an ordinance is it's the specificity allows us to then say, oh no,
Yeah.
that's particular, that part doesn't.
Yeah.
Let's
Yeah.
change the language of that, I think is the point. If you just talk about it generally, we're no further along than we are tonight.
Right. And what about parking? Do we want to take that on at all? I know there's some strong feelings about it, and I really don't have a strong sense of what we should do with it. But does anybody have something they have some passion for that they'd like to argue for that we could have staff draft up as well to look
How
at?
about the fact that we just had a whole bunch of people get very upset because we put pole vaults in and we lost.
Oh,
32
let's do
parking
that.
spots, which also would have, it had continued, we would have lost 54 parking spots. Businesses would have left town. And I can tell you personally, one of my issues with what was going on was eliminating downtown parking with my business. If I don't have parking for my customers, why should I have a store? And I still say to this point, we don't have a guarantee on the parking lot we have. We've already eliminated all downtown parking except for 1 spot per residential unit. I think that's cutting it about as far as we should. And I'm speaking outwardly about it because I was a
Does
business owner
anybody-
down there for 14 years. And you have people in this room saying, we're moving our business if you keep these bulb outs. So why are we considering at this point cutting any more parking right now until we know, yeah, we've got a place we can.
I
go.
asked a question. I asked, does anybody have any passion for the parking issue? I think
No,
we
there's
got
no
an
passion
answer.
here.
Is that enough passion?
I'm not I didn't recommend anything,
No, I'm
but is
teasing.
there any,
I said, was that enough passion?
that was, but is there any passion on the other side? I mean, I don't know where everybody is on this issue, but I know we discussed it a couple meetings ago. Does anybody feel strongly that we ought to look at something on parking, or do you think that based on what Lynn just said, that really that's too toxic and difficult? Well,
I just keep trying to rack my head and think how it would help, the neighbors and the property owner and this town at the same time. And parking's kind of hard. Like, I'm always for trying to put as much parking as you can on your own site.
Okay.
I was denied
Yeah.
myself.
We're allowed to put more parking in?
No, they eliminated my parking, my driveway, because it's illegal to have a driveway on Main Street by CDOT regulations.
There are driveways all over Main Street.
It is
There's
against
driveways.
CDOT regulations to have a driveway on an interstate highway. I was told many, many, many times.
I don't think that can't be right.
I'm very
Is it?
familiar with this.
Wow.
Maintain the one you have, just not
Yes,
add.
you can
You can
maintain the one you have.
but you cannot add.
I see. Oh, you were looking.
Well, does anybody have any
No, I have
passion
one,
around
but they-
parking
they-
and historic
I have a
structures?
Range issue that I had.
So the one place where I could see a question around parking, and this goes back to the setbacks, the rear setbacks, and because I just dealt with this with a client, is that if it is a commercial building and there is no commercial parking required in downtown on the property of the business, then allowing someone to eliminate that rear setback that is for parking.
Correct.
Now, if it were residential, obviously,
Comes into play, you have
you need to keep
yes.
you would still need to have it, but I think if it were codified that we had to go through a variance process to
I
eliminate
see
that
what you're
setback,
saying.
that if no one else is allowed, like the only reason we would have parking would be for everyone else. Like,
Yeah.
or that my client, the only reason they would have parking would be to provide it for other people when they're not required to have it themselves. So I think if those rear setbacks, they're on River Street and William Street, could be eliminated for commercial only uses.
But that's That's not historic specific, that's for commercial.
Well, but if it was a historic building that was being added on to for commercial use, no residential use is on the lot, then you could eliminate that rear setback. I guess is where I'm headed with that. So ties back to your point. It sort of ties back into the setback issue that if it's not a residential use, then those rear setbacks of commercial buildings could get greatly reduced.
So the other night at the council meeting, number 7 was, you could have a building, have 50% commercial, 50% residential.
The back 50%, yes.
As long
Yeah.
as it has
Is that without that building being added onto?
It is,
So therefore, they'd have to have a parking spot for the back.
right, yes, they would still
That's
have to
what I was
provide
wondering.
all parking regulations, just like they would with the short-term rental option. But
any residential use would still need parking.
any residential use would still need parking, and so even if they expanded the building to take advantage of a greater 50% rear, they would still have to provide.
Do others think what Robert, so that would be a very kind of a narrow parking exception for historic commercial buildings?
It'd be a commercial zoning is the only place where it could work, or mixed use zoning. Because you wouldn't have a commercial building in a residential zone. You couldn't.
There are some that exist in this town. Studio, for example.
Would the group want to see if Madison drafted something on that narrow idea and take a look at it or not? Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm
It's,
sorry.
it's really hard. You guys are so tiny. I can barely see when you're talking.
It's,
Sorry about that.
Is that better?
Yeah, I
go
can
ahead,
see
Ken.
you.
Ask your question again, please.
Oh, there. I just figured out how to make you so much bigger now. I can see you. I was saying that does anybody, does the group, how does the group feel about maybe asking Madison to also draft something up on that idea that Robert just articulated, very narrow on the parking, just to see what it looks like? Again, we're not trying to approve anything or push anything, but we're just trying to maybe continue this discussion on a more specific basis on the next meeting. What does the group think about that?
I'd like to just ask Madison, how feasible would that be for you to do what Ken's suggesting?
I certainly think I could draft something before the next meeting. I don't know that I'd be able to do a ton of research if y'all were also wanting me to do research. But just taking these ideas and turning them into an ordinance, I think I can do that.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be it doesn't have to be perfect. It's just a very, very rough draft, just to give us the idea and to smoke out some of these issues so that we can have a more specific discussion.
Yeah, maybe more like a bulleted kind of, outline, or
Well-
even just for her, workload. And
Well, whatever, Madison, whatever you think would be appropriate, but we definitely are not trying to burden you with, drafting legislation that, we don't want you to do that. We want you to just do a quick and dirty draft of it without the research, so that we can look at something more specific.
Well, I appreciate you thinking of me. And yes, I can certainly do that.
And I'm still kind of looking more for something that would affect a greater amount of people than like one specific building that needs a parking space, but just something that helps the process of doing a remodel for them.
Any
And
suggestions?
not yet, but I think we should research and ask questions of neighbors that have either gone through or want to go through the process, and what can make your life easier and not cost the town money,
Yeah.
and not be disrespectful to your neighbors in the same time. I mean,
Is there a way to, I don't know, this might be a question for the attorney, is there a way to provide a different tax basis for a historic structure?
It is my understanding that that is not something the town can control, no.
That was something in the.
We looked into it
Colorado National
before, so
Parks and Wildlife.
I asked for tax ease, but yeah, they said
You
they
can
couldn't.
certainly, if you abide by the state and federal regulations, which are completely different from ours, especially given that we just lessened a bunch of ours.
Right.
If you abide by the state and federal regulations, you can apply for state and federal tax credits, which would then obviously lessen how much you would actually have to spend. But that is not something that the town controls.
Gotcha.
And they can also get, grants through there.
Maybe that'd be something helpful is if the town provided an informational packet about, hey, look at all the different grants and tax benefits you can get if you go through the steps that are required by
National Trust and
we're not requiring those steps, but if you chose to go down that path, hey, look at all these benefits, and maybe that would help to educate people on what's possible.
but their regulations are much more strict than
Oh, yeah.
ours,
They are.
so it's a pain in the ass.
It might educate or it might scare them.
Unless it's a big commercial project.
Yes, I
Yeah.
can certainly link to History Colorado's website on our website saying, hey, if you are interested in this, here's where you go to that. That's certainly not an issue, and it certainly doesn't need to be codified in order to do that. We're certainly happy to help provide any direction, guidance, or help link people with the people who can give that direction and guidance. But yes, monetarily, the town's hands are a little tied.
You know,
And
one
some
thing
of
that I think would help is just, and I've mentioned this before, but just like frequently asked questions. You know, if I'm looking at designating a property historic, what's the implication? So, you know, if I want to alter it or I want to do something to it, you know, what's the process? What's the design process? Who do I have? You know, what's the additional red tape? What are the benefits? What's the flexibility that I get as a historic? And if we were able to create that in black and white, I think I'm not suggesting or asking you to do that by the next meeting, Madison, but I do think it's something that we've talked about several times that would really cut through it if we had a short pamphlet that said, here's the implication. This is what it means to be a historic property in Minturn. And by the way, as part of that, on the back, if you wanted to comply with the federal or state requirements, you could also get tax credits.
And I think that having a specific web page on the historic preservation segment of the town website, and here's a page that outlines it, and here are the benefits potentially.
And hopefully that
Ye-
flyer would be a little bit shorter this time because we did
Yes.
try to do that, what Ken was saying, about, you know, the effects of historic preservation just from a process standpoint a couple months ago. And that's what kicked off the whole discussion about the options, because it was found that even in the best case scenario, if you had to go through all of the different processes that are involved, you were looking at 8 to 12 months. So, yes, now that we've fixed or added those options, hopefully it will be easier to put together a short, understandable flyer rather than this very convoluted flowchart that I had to explain multiple times because that's how complicated it was.
So can we do a simple
Well,
thing? If
if
you have
you-
an old building, you can just do whatever you want in any time frame you want.
Yeah.
Would that help?
You know,
That was how it was.
And there's no fees.
Madison, whenever you can fit it in your schedule, I think that would be good. Not necessarily the next meeting, because I know we've already talked about a number of things you're going to have to do. But you know, in the near future, it would be really good to get a draft of that to where we could take a look at it. Can you imagine, Kelly, your conversation with people that actually are owners or contractors dealing with historic buildings? You say, okay, here's what we do in Minturn. What's missing? What is it that we could offer that we don't offer that would be super helpful? I mean, it just creates a context for the whole feedback system, and getting actually some good feedback from folks. If we had something like that, not to mention the Marcos and the world, et cetera, that, it's hard for him to understand everything. If we had something really succinct, it would really help a lot.
Great. So I guess we all need to do some more thinking about
Yeah.
how we think we might be able to.
And what other towns do, like, I mean,
Yep.
towns like Crested Butte, Buena Vista, Salida,
Idaho Springs.
yeah, all those have, they're very popular towns
Even
because
Boulder.
they kept a lot of their old
Yeah.
buildings. And,
Yeah, see what they're doing that might help.
yeah, which is probably, I don't know, hard to do if now it seems like you can't talk to anybody anymore. Everything's on a website.
Well, and I think too, it's important to consider that like where we're coming from is a historic preservation committee, and we can make suggestions, but then the planning commission, and because if it's changing zoning, it's going to go to the planning commission and then to town council. They're going to have other priorities as well, and that
Right.
our role is to promote historic preservation.
I think we need to do some
And
thinking and research ourselves.
Yeah, and
Yep.
recognize that there are other considerations in town, but our job is to promote this. And how
Yeah.
and if there are any other comments, we move on to the next subject, or
Well, and I, the things that I've seen, and I've said at meetings, the hardest is clarifying for people that we're not trying to make every single building in this town historic.
right, that's a good point.
And people
Yep.
think that, they get panicked. It's like, oh, everybody's gonna do this. There's certain criteria you have to meet, and that criteria isn't always the easiest to come up with. So how do we go about getting people to realize that just because they own home, we're not gonna go after them and do it historically, you know?
Well, and I wonder, should we develop a,
We can't keep asking Madison to do all these things. What can we do to help?
Yeah.
well, it raises the question of should the town designate a library of properties that we feel are historic?
Well,
We
we're
have a
on
grant
that.
for that.
Yes.
Well,
Yes,
Yes.
We have a
So
grant.
And the question is,
and that was a grant.
at some point, how would we say, okay, here's what the grant found, the study found.
Hmm.
How do we then say, okay, A, B, D, and J are the properties we're gonna pick?
So, because you weren't here when we were applying for the grant, I want to explain what it's going over. Yes. So the grant, we got a $25,000 grant from History Colorado with matching funds of $1,600 from the town. And so we will be doing a windshield survey, which is essentially a very cursory survey of all of the Old Town character area, because that was all the grant would cover. Old Town character area, which is from 100 block to the 700 block,
Okay.
or Cemetery Road. So out of that windshield survey, then you, the council, the community, just a group of stakeholders will choose 10 structures from that survey, that initial cursory survey, for the consultant, Ron Sladek with Tatanka Associates, to do a deep dive in, do research at the county, research at any kind of library, into the architecture of the structure, the history of the structure, etc., so that essentially at the end of it, we will have 10 that, should the town deem appropriate, we could then easily turn those into nomination applications. And again, the 10 was picked because of the limited amount of money that we had, and that will take quite a bit of time to do all that research. I can confirm, just doing the research on the 2 Nelson houses, which were, twins owned by brothers, should have been super simple to carry over one to the other. It was a ton of work, and that was just essentially on one house copied over. So
Madison, how can I ask? I missed a step there. So how are the 10 selected?
So we haven't selected the 10 yet. The
No, I
windshield
know, but
survey-
how will they be?
Oh, so
Who
that will
who?
be done based on input from the community, based on input from y'all, and I assume based on input from council.
Okay,
Obviously,
so
everybody
some
has-
process that hasn't been defined yet, but
Absolutely.
those are the folks. Okay, got it. I got it.
Obviously, staff has a couple of contenders in
Sure.
our minds already, but
Okay,
by
got
no
it.
means is that decision made in a vacuum. We will be needing public input on, hey, here's what the initial findings are based on this. Like Ron will have recommendations based on my
Yep.
initial findings. Here are the 10 properties that I believe, but the town will be able to choose
Will
them.
he make a broader recommendation, not just 10, so that we're looking at if he only recommends 10, then we're only looking at those 10. Is he gonna recommend, oh, you should consider these 20?
He certainly can, but we only have the bandwidth for him to investigate 10.
I understand, but in terms of his initial findings from the windshield survey,
Right.
he's not gonna just give us 10 to look at.
No, I don't believe so unless there truly are only 10 that need to be looked at.
That's the other thing, is that how many buildings in this town make all the criteria, have all the history, are in the original conditions that are really
Worth preserving.
worth preserving.
Yeah, good point.
It
Good
might
point.
be that we say 10 and we come up with 5.
Right. Yep. Yep.
At which point I'd
Well-
be asking them to extend that windshield survey a little bit further south to get my money.
I think
Point.
they're easily 10.
Yeah.
But there's also
What is the timing again? So I'm sorry, didn't mean to talk over
No
you.
worries. We had a kickoff meeting with History Colorado last week. Ron is finishing up a couple of projects that he's working on for other clients right now. He anticipates to be up doing initial field survey work at the end of this month. And we'll likely have a kickoff meeting with the HPC in either November or December. Just to kind of introduce everybody to the project, including the public. Like obviously the public is aware that we've been awarded this grant, but all of the interviews obviously happened without public involvement.
Great.
And so this is really just kind of getting everybody onto the same page. Without getting into kind of every single step, we are anticipating the survey to be completed by the end of next year.
Got it. Got it. Okay. Thank you.
Mhm.
That'll be great. That'll be a fun November, December discussion.
Cool.
That'll be really
Absolutely.
cool. Yeah, that's great.
Windshield survey in a year,
The whole project,
the whole process.
yes.
When do you anticipate him offering up the options?
Let's see if I can find the schedule. So I can't quite remember. Let's see.
I was involved in the interviews too, and all the timeline was pretty much the same for everybody.
I think having an inventory. would be
Everyone's busy.
that'd be super
I
helpful.
think this is really big development and exciting. If we could get to a place where we say these are the ones that we really want to protect in town, that'll be terrific, and it would release some anxieties. I think. I know that doesn't mean that if you're not on the top 10 list that you're never going to get designated, but it certainly gives everybody a clear communication that these are the ones that we really feel like are important.
Okay, so based on the schedule put together, reconnaissance survey field work, which is the windshield stuff, will happen October to November. Research and writing of the report will happen December to March. Reconnaissance survey presentation of findings will happen in April. And then y'all will select the 10, and then that will turn into intensive survey fieldwork April to May. The research and writing of the specific forms that have to be filled out for History Colorado will happen June through September. And then the project report will happen October to November, and presentation of findings, project completion will happen December.
Thank you.
Mhm.
All right, I think, are we ready to move on to the next subject?
Yes,
And thank you
I
everyone for
think
your
so.
thoughts,
Passionate.
thoughts and considerations.
Yes.
passionate ideas. So staff reports, planning department update.
Yes, so there are 2 properties in the planning department update. These are things that were sent out via e-blast, so you should have received them that way, and the applications themselves were forwarded to you as they came in. You'll notice that both of these properties, the deadlines have expired. 532 Main expired as of yesterday at 5 p.m. Neither one received any nomination applications, so these properties will proceed with their regular process. 701 Main was just to alter the exterior to put up new siding. 532 Main was to demolish the structure. So now that the 2-week stay for 532 Main, since that was the most recent one, expired yesterday, the property owner can go forth with the regular demolition application.
Full disclosure, by the way, I'm the owner of 532. Probably you guys know that, but I just want to make sure you knew it.
I love that fence.
You like the fence?
I love the fence made out of slats of whatever. I was telling Kelly he should go save it.
Okay. We're saving the floor. That's one thing that's historic over there. We are saving the floor. I'll save the fence too, Lynn.
Okay, at least the wood. Kelly will come up with something creative.
Yeah.
Is that,
That's it.
okay, and then Historic Preservation Commission, oh, sorry.
I apologize, that was not it. So Ken and Tracy, y'all cannot see it. However, I will send you pictures. And I do apologize, this was meant to be included in my report, and it was not. I did forget, so again, I'm super sorry about that. But donated by the owners of 482 Eagle River Street, David and Lily Ford, is an extremely well-preserved section of a wooden water line that they excavated at their property. And so they called us up and said, hey, we just dug this up and it's in great condition. Do you want it? And we were just like, yeah. It was just like, this is a great example of the infrastructure that we used to have. And it's amazing that we're still coming across this type of thing. And so that is in display in the council room until further notice and when we decide what to do with it.
Maybe we'll put it up next to the barn with a little display explaining what it was.
Make a light post out of it out by the barn.
Was it in use at the time that they excavated it?
Madison, we did
It
see
was-
that through the town e-blast, so thank you.
Yeah, I
did.
saw it too.
Yes.
I've seen it in person. It was laying on the ground over at his house. It wasn't dug up, but it was probably dug up at some point, but it's been laying out there for quite a while. I've been admiring it when I was over there when Chris lived there.
I have a piece of the one that was dug
Pretty
up
cool.
on Vine Street in front of my house. But
Yeah,
it's much smaller than that. That one's in beautiful shape.
it's a beautiful one. It's a nice big piece too.
Yes, so I apologize. I am now done.
Thanks for sharing.
That's so cool. I love that he did that. That's great.
All right, do any of the Historic Preservation Commissioners have additional comments to make?
Yes, if anybody, since it's historical, if anybody sees Ella Burnett this week, please wish her happy 98th birthday.
Oh, wow. That's milestone.
That's a big milestone.
Yeah.
Do you know what day is her birthday?
Her birthday is
17th?
Thursday.
Great. How's she doing?
She's doing great. I took a little treat up to her the other day and she's amazing. I mean, she's having a harder time moving, getting around, but
So
she's
am I.
still doing it. Yes.
We all are.
Her mind is absolutely impeccable. It's just, and the thing that I wish we could do, when we had, what was it, the 110th or 115th anniversary of Minturn, it was about 6 or 8 years ago.
That was before me.
She was willing, and she did this for the Historical Society. She will not give a talk, but at that time she was willing to come in, and if people asked questions, she was willing to answer them. And sometimes I think that would be something neat we could do as a little thing for the Historical Society while she's still around. I don't know if she's still willing, but I can certainly ask her.
I just wish she could write a book for us and everything she remembers.
I mean,
But
she
I keep telling all the old older people that I've talked to, just write down stuff like in your. If you have free time, just write down anything you can remember before you.
She
go.
was a nurse at the Gilman Hospital. I think she might have been born and raised. She's lived in Mintry 76 years now.
And she was born in Red Cliff.
Yeah,
And yeah, when the Gilman Hospital was the only hospital in the county.
she was nursing there. Phyllis, her niece, was born there. So was Terry Pearson, I think.
Oh, wow.
I mean, it's just, you can sit there for hours. The problem is writing it all down and remembering it is hard. But if she came and she were willing to answer questions, you know, it might be
Do a
something we
recording.
could do for a special presentation one evening and record some of it. You're right.
Like NPR does the the recordings.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I forget what those.
Yeah,
are
I know what you mean.
and those are put in the Library of Congress.
Yeah.
It'd be pretty neat to have someone sit her down and.
Well, I probably will see.
I'm in
this.
where I am in the hill country. I'm in the Sabinal Valley area, and there's two books called Bear Meat and Honey, back when bears were here, etc. And it was done by this guy here locally, and he did exactly what you're talking about. He went and interviewed the old timers before they died, and it's in their own language, and with the way they talk comes out in the narrative that's written, and they tell stories of the Indians when they were here. I mean, it's crazy stuff, and they talk about different things that we all know, like the water hole down on the Medina River, that there was this Comanche raid there, and that there was this cabin over here. It's really fascinating to bring it all to life like that. We did something similar at Pearl. We did oral histories. We got one of the Whitty Museum in San Antonio to have a guy come and do oral histories for all the old timers, and it's really a treasure. And then we've used those stories to tell the story of the Pearl. And if somebody really had some passion for it, it could be done pretty easily. I'll bet there's some historians or somebody with the university they volunteered to do it. We didn't have to pay them.
Just to forewarn you, Ken, be careful of using the word passion. I might sprout again.
I'm a very passionate person too, so I'm with you.
Well, thanks
for sharing all that.
Yeah, acknowledging Ella's wonderful.
Well, I think it's very special. We don't have many of those people left in Minturn, and anything we can.
Yeah.
I think is important.
Telling you.
Lynn Kanakis might be another one. He's a bit
Oh,
younger,
he's
but
great.
He's been
I
here,
love
what,
talking to
65,
him.
70 years.
Yeah, he has so much information.
Who else do we have left?
I'm pretty sure Ella's probably the oldest.
Well, Mr. Myers, I haven't talked to him, but recently, but
Is he still in town?
he's in Arizona.
Yeah, but I'm speaking right
Now,
here.
but
We don't have.
It was a
many
couple
left.
of 5 years ago he moved away, so I used to
Jenny, might-
spend a lot of hours talking with him.
There's another older woman here. I know 4 of her daughters.
The time
It's
is
Jenny's mom.
And the backs up in Red Cliff.
Yeah, she lives down here.
So I mean, the backs are.
Oh, the backs are up in,
Time's running out for sure.
and then now that we have a historical commission and that, it's a good thing to look at for a more fun oriented situation.
We're preserving memory.
You know, was it Brian who said at the one council meeting, trying to find other things we can do with this? And that might
Make it
be
more
something.
fun.
I don't think
Maybe we
want to
should-
Come here and talk to 50 people, but I think she.
Maybe we should we should capture their oral history, before these people die. And maybe we should do that this is comment section, right? But it's not a crazy idea. We could raise some money and organize that and start with 6 people and just get their oral histories.
Mhm.
And
Something to
one of
think
my
about.
things that I keep putting off every year is either going through with Lynn or her to the book that we do have and
Keith's
putting
Bill's book?
Bill's book and putting addresses to the houses, because right now most of them just have a name
Yes.
and with no photo, and it's kind of frustrating that I don't know what house he's talking about, because he just lists the name of the people, and I don't know which house he's talking about.
Thankfully, he seemed to travel fairly linearly through the book,
Yeah.
through town, so that way you could get some context. But yeah, when I was looking through that book it was for the Nelson houses.
Mhm.
I was just like,
Which house?
I don't know what this is in reference to, Bill. Please be more specific.
But like, you know, Lynn, or not? Yeah, I mean, he's remembers everything. So,
Well, that could be another, we should seriously consider some kind of a project like an oral history or putting putting addresses to Bill's book. You know, it'd be kind of a neat little thing.
Mhm.
and it could be like a walking map, you know, where you have the names in the book and
And
connect
you
the
have
book
that plaque there saying.
to a walking map. It'd be really cool. I mean, stories about the lady that put the toilet next to her stove because she never wanted to be cold when she did. You know, it's like, it'd be cool to know what house that was.
The other thing was a week ago, the Historical Society
Yeah.
put on a talk at the Eagle Library about the railroad going through the Rocky Mountains.
Oh,
And it
wow.
was done by the woman who was the vice president of the Colorado Railroad
Okay.
Museum, came up, and they awarded a gentleman in Eagle, some citizen of the something railroad award, because he donated all these things his father had collected from the old railroad up here. Minturn was mentioned, but that was a good talk. If they Zoom that or something, that might be something we could present here and look at. And then there were question and answers, and it was a small room, but the room was packed. It was really quite interesting. The labor it took and the work it took. That's another history.
Okay, you guys,
Getting late.
You done?
it's
So-
getting late for me. Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
we need to- what-
Do we,
what else?
we're
Any
done,
future
aren't we?
Agenda items to add to
Oh,
the-
I'm sorry.
It's the last, any future agenda items?
I
have the
I
items
think
that-
beyond just the direction items we talked about, that's the only thing I can think of.
I'll take a motion to adjourn.
I'll second it.
No, he needs a motion to
You
adjourn.
need to make it.
I'll make
I think
a
Ken's
motion to
volunteering a
adjourn.
motion to
Sorry.
I'm volunteering a motion to adjourn.
Okay.
Ken's making the motion.
It's been a
Tom's
great
seconding.
discussion, guys. Good to see you.
take care, Ken.
Bye.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Bye-bye.
Sorry, I was getting
Hey,
antsy.
Tracy.
Bye-bye. Bye, Tracy. Bye, everybody.